guys able to hear me?
Yes, we can now, Roger.
Hi, Mark.
Good afternoon.
Cam, it's 1:30. Do we want to go ahead and get started or give it another minute?
I think we can start doing roll call. Doesn't look like a whole lot of people are in. I hope we have a quorum.
I'm going to do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't
6.
think we do.
We have 6 people and 11 in the committee, so that would be still a quorum.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get started then. Welcome everybody to the August 18th meeting of the Regulation Rewrite Committee of the Arizona Board of Pharmacy. My name is Lori Walmsley, and I will call this meeting to order at 1:30 p.m. Dr. Grandi, can you take roll call to get started?
Certainly. Ms. Walmsley.
Here.
All right. Ms. Nair. Mr. Dang. Mr. Pond.
I'm here.
Ms. Ho.
Here.
Ms. Fine. Ms. Nishi.
Here.
Mr. Bozen.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Ms. Sutcliffe. Ms. Hallmer. Okay. Got 6 present and 5 absent, Madam Chair.
We're okay to proceed.
We are.
All right. If you could direct me how we want to go through this. I know that you had assigned out some homework for members of the committee to review each of the sections. Do we want to just go in order, skipping over those that aren't present on each of the sections to see what suggestions they had, and then we'll do discussion within the group? Is that the best way to proceed, or is there anything else we're missing, Cam?
No, I think that would be the best appropriate way. I do see Kelly on there. Kelly, can you just acknowledge?
Hello.
Hi, Kelly.
Okay,
Awesome.
Madam Chair, we had, if I may, I think Ms. Nishi was first. I'm not sure if she had an opportunity to review R423, 304, and 305.
Okay, I was in charge of 304 reports, and that was it affected pharmacy interns. I had no changes on the reporting to their status of mailing address or annual reports. It was pretty straightforward. Did the board or this group want to change anything about what a pharmacy intern or a graduate intern has to report to the board or the time frame? No, okay, because it's in 10 days of changing employment or mailing address, the intern or graduate has to notify the board. So I'm okay with that. The reports are pretty much, I looked at other states, and the annual reports are pretty much the same as everybody else's, that they have to be a graduate of an accredited school. They have to file their hours. So I was okay with that. But I didn't know if the board wanted to make any changes to the requirements of a pharmacy intern or a graduate intern. That is 304. No? Okay.
Karen,
Yes.
you're not recommending any changes.
Correct.
Other
Can I-
committee members, do you have any other opinions?
Can I just ask a question? I think I'm curious about the reports that they have to file for their hours. So
Okay,
and maybe there's just like a question for staff. I don't know if I necessarily have a recommendation, but like I believe that there's two types of reports that people would generally file, maybe one on their own for work hours that their manager pharmacist would sign, and then also ones for rotations. And the rotation ones are generally done through the school, right?
well, this one doesn't say rotation.
So the annual report in B1 is for colleges that are not approved by the pharmacy. And those are, so they're not ACP accredited. We have to obviously, if they are ACP accredited, there are standards that they have to meet based for that accreditation. But these are colleges that may not be approved. I don't know of any that are not approved today. It could be international colleges as well that are not part of ACPE.
Well, that was kind of my thought process, Cam, is this really needed since it's an ACPE requirement anyway? And if somebody that's going to graduate is going to meet all of these anyways, or they're not going to be able to graduate.
But yeah, my understanding is if it's a college in this country, prior to graduation, they got to become accredited or in the process of being accredited. Therefore, they're meeting the minimum requirements that ACP has a standard for. So I'm not sure if it's really applicable these days. I know NABP vets out international folks, whether they meet the requirement for foreign pharmacist equivalency exams or anything of that nature. So that's already vetted by NABP. So I'll leave it up to the committee to see whether this is even valuable today.
I don't think you need it, but I'm not in the group really. I'm from the outside. I don't think you need it because they're going to need it to sit for the NAPLEX anyway. So that's already laid out by NABP, not really Arizona. But
Yeah.
Oh.
I agree with that. I feel like if we're just like collecting a report annually for the sake of like collecting a report, it may just be extra work for the staff when you're going to have to check if they have 1,500 or so anyway when they go to apply for their pharmacist license. Maybe
we simply put annual report that the College of Pharmacy shall attest that an individual graduated. Simply that, how they attest to it, that's up to the board and up to the
Don't we collect their diploma or get something from the college when they graduate anyway, Kim? Why would they have to provide a report? I mean, if that's a requirement for graduation, why would the college need to provide a report, which is undue work for the college and then for your staff to deal with it?
It is. So each individual person has to submit a transcript today. If I can get a list, a report, an Excel spreadsheets, and all these people have graduated, that makes it a lot easier. That may actually help smoothen out the process, because one of the biggest pieces of information we miss today is someone's diploma or someone's curriculum or whatever that they've graduated, showing that they graduated. But an Excel spreadsheet from the dean of the school or whoever is authorized by the school to submit an Excel spreadsheet. I think I'm really focusing on the two schools here. And we can leverage that. That would actually help us speed up the process a little more to get people licensed and able to test faster.
I think that makes sense. The only like reservation I have with the transcript thing is that does take time. I think there's probably only like a handful of the states that I'm licensed in that required me to get a transcript. And they have to I have to request it from them. They have to send it to me, and then I have to send it to the board. So it's probably like an added maybe like 2-week process on the applicant. But all in all, that's probably less work than this. And wouldn't transcripts be part of the FP process anyway? I feel like they are for NABP.
And ABP now accepts the transcripts
Okay.
from the universities. So they have started that process this year. Not all the schools are doing it yet, but I know more and more are getting on board.
So was the concern of this rule for people who went to foreign schools, foreign pharmacy schools that weren't accredited? Was that the kind of driving thing for this rule?
I think the driving thing for this rule was when there was a increased need for pharmacists, schools started popping up left and right. They weren't necessarily accredited yet. So I think that was the,
Okay, then if we totally get rid of this rule, but then we don't have a provision for foreign graduates, how would you evaluate
well,
the foreign
the
graduate?
foreign graduate is vetted actually by NABP. NABP
So
will
the
vet
same way
a
we
person and allow them to test for a foreign pharmacist equivalency exam if they meet the requirements. That's NABP's job. And if NABP deems them appropriate, they test, then we're good to go as far as we're concerned.
Okay, and then you would be good to go in the same manner if it was a US student graduating from a US accredited pharmacy school then, right?
Correct.
Because to sit for NABP, they would need all these like transcripts, whatever else. Okay.
Correct.
Then do you want to strike this or do you want to?
We may be able to strike it completely, and maybe to Emily's point, instead of delaying it by 2 weeks, if I can get a Excel spreadsheet from the college that says these individuals have graduated successfully through the program, maybe just a language that states some sort of attestation to that fact.
So you would want the graduate to get that information and forward it to the board?
No, the school can provide that to us.
So we're going to put that in the rule that the school.
If the committee would allow me to do it, I may speed up the process by 2 weeks versus requesting a transcript.
But as a board, can we tell the pharmacy school we need this Excel spreadsheet of all your recent graduates? Can you do?
Yeah.
That? You can. Oh.
We can.
Cam, what do you do with graduates from not U of A or Midwestern?
We don't get a whole lot of those folks, and we'll just have to wait for a transcript to come through. If the school doesn't provide us a list, then we'll have to show somewhere that these guys have graduated. So a transcript would be required.
So it wouldn't be part of an annual report, but it'd be just part of the application process in order to become licensed?
Correct. And maybe we even change the header instead of stating annual report.
Yeah, I think that's fine. You are going to get graduates from schools outside of those two.
No, we do. The only other thing I would probably change is instead of having a reciting pharmacy intern and grad intern, just strike all that and just call them interns.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the comments I had for later in the meeting is I thought we were getting rid of the term grad intern.
Yeah.
I don't really see a benefit in keeping it, honestly.
I don't either, because if NABP is going to check for that before they let them sit for it, then I don't think you have to look at it. We have to look at it when they want to apply for a job in Arizona or to be licensed.
Kim, does your staff spend time to track these down for people you don't get them from now?
We do spend time. Obviously, it's going to be better because NABP now collects the transcripts, so we can just go to the clearinghouse and pick it up. But that just recently started. Prior to that process, it was, I would say probably 5 out of 10 applications are missing this today for interns that are graduating.
This is Mark. One of the benefits to striking this language, couple benefits are, if the board is willing to accept intern hours through other means, NABP, the school at the time of graduation, then there's no reason for schools, people, and the board of staff to try to track down these annual reports. And the other benefit is there's this last sentence in here that says, if you're one of those people that had hours and you didn't turn them in within 30 days of the calendar year, we're not going to count them. And the people I'm thinking of who could experience that awful technicality would be, I think there's 2 schools right now that are in pre-candidate status with ACPE, meaning they haven't graduated anyone yet, but we anticipate them being accredited once they graduate someone. And that might mean that if they show up to Arizona to get their initial license, and they didn't follow this annual report thing, that could be a problem for them, and I wouldn't want that to be.
Makes total sense to me.
So am I hearing the consensus is to strike? Any opposition?
I'm in favor.
And that's just B. A would still remain.
Yes. And really, should that be under notification, or should we just clean up the other language? I mean, couldn't we include this in just the other notification?
Yeah, I think we can move it into other notifications, definitely.
And maybe you don't need that section at all.
Lori, that was going to be my comment for A, is whatever we end up clarifying for A with the rules for pharmacy interns, notifying within 10 days, the same rule for pharmacists and same for techs and everybody else. We should call it the same thing in all of the different rules with it.
Hey, Kim, you got that one?
I did get that one. I think the next one on the list, Madam Chair, is, and this is also Karen, is R423305.
It's miscellaneous intern training provisions to prevent a loss of intern hour credit and before beginning training. An intern may ask the board if a training site meets the requirements specified in R423-301E and R423-302A. Okay, so they can ask, but couldn't they ask anyway?
I think Roger and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, a couple of years back, we kind of left the internship locations up to the schools to determine.
Oh.
And so if the schools have determined the location and an individual is a preceptor site and preceptor, that's up to them, right? As long as they don't have any discipline on the record or anything of that nature, school is free to go. So again, this is a section where
That's on the school board.
I'm not sure if we really need.
Right, because it would be the school's responsibility to clear the preceptor and the site prior to placing a student at that facility.
We have a requirement for preceptorship in our
Right.
regulations, right? So as long as the school's following that criteria.
Right, because then this wouldn't apply.
And students shouldn't need to count employer hours anyways, because more than 1,500 hours is required within ACPE anyway.
Okay. So the changes we're going to make is only for the first rule, 304, and we're going to keep A. The changes, unless you're going to merge that into notifications. Did you want to just put that A into notifications?
Yep,
Okay, so then we're going to strike them both.
correct.
Check, check.
And again, I'll make these notes and then I know Gina's frantically checking the law book, so she and I could circle back in an event that there is a conflict of some sort and we'll bring it back to you guys. But on the fly, it's going to be difficult to figure out whether this impacts any other section or whether we're allowed to do this or not. But right now I'll make notes and then we'll circle back if there are issues.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So look, we got rid of a whole page of the law book.
We're moving
Well,
along.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
So I missed the last meeting, so I apologize if this was already discussed, but it pertains to interns and preceptors. But was it brought up the concept of multidisciplinary preceptors and allowing non-pharmacists to serve as preceptors? I know we ran into that during COVID. And I'm pretty sure in our rules, and it may be a statutory change needed as well, but didn't know if that was brought up at all.
No, I don't believe it was brought up at the last meeting.
I know both of the colleges, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but during the pandemic, this was an important issue to them, and they wanted to see that. I know some of the other states have moved towards that, allowing other disciplines, nurses, doctors, other types of settings to be able to precept student pharmacists. In
Would
kind
that be
of
under
unique
302
rotations.
then?
Probably, yeah.
In general, I'm super supportive of that concept personally because I did that for my school and it was like a homeopath and it was extremely helpful. So I definitely see the value in it.
And maybe it would be something as simple as just non-pharmacist providers approved by their College of Pharmacy, because it would still need to be approved by their experiential department, but as long as they've been vetted and are signed up with whatever they need to do, that the board would recognize them and being able to precept those students.
This is Matt. Would there be some sort of criteria for who could?
I think the schools should be the ones determining that based on the ACPE requirements and whatever those standards say for the training.
Is there anything in 302 that would prevent another healthcare practitioner? I mean, it addresses what's required to be a, well, pharmacy intern preceptor. It's that they hold a current pharmacist license, unrestricted license.
There are other sections also, Lori, that says that an intern, pharmacy technician training can only be supervised by a pharmacist. So that would have to be.
And I think as long as they're not doing like working in a pharmacy, you know, dispensing medications or something, you could maybe put that caveat in there. But in alternative settings, there's lots of practice sites that are not involved in the prescription dispensing process, where they have other employees and staff that could be beneficial to be working with that student.
Are you thinking about disciplines that have prescriptive authority or any type of discipline?
Yeah, like physician offices. There's some pharmacists that may work in certain settings, even in hospital settings, you know, where a student could spend certain days or weeks in certain other departments or with other providers.
This is Mark. The way ACPE handles it, and frankly ASHP through the residency programs, is not only do they encourage pharmacy students and residents to work with other disciplines, particularly on the residency side, it's a requirement. You can't spend all your time working with the pharmacist. You have to have face-to-face collaboration with someone in another discipline, and usually that's a prescriber, nurse, physical therapist, respiratory therapist, OT, you name it. And in most of my rotations, even 25 years ago, most of the time I spent on my rotations was with people other than pharmacists. But once a day, once a week, I would meet with the bona fide preceptor who would say, all right, let's go through your week. You spent the week with the infectious disease team, and they were all doctors and residents, physicians and residents. Tell me what you learned. Let's go through it. Did you meet the objectives I set out for last week? And that's appropriate under the ACPE guidelines. It's appropriate under the ASHP guidelines. And so I think we can still accomplish the interdisciplinary care, but leave the final sort of stamp of approval to a pharmacist of, did you learn what you were supposed to learn during this internship experience? Even if the number of hours you spent with me were just supervisory, because it is a supervisory standard and not a side by side, you got to be on my hip standard.
And Mark, I guess just to clarify, the situation that came up, and maybe this is the wrong place to insert it, but I know we were referring back to some of these rules, was student pharmacists being able to go and volunteer at vaccine clinics, where there wasn't a pharmacist on duty during that time, but another trained provider, a doctor, nurse practitioner, whoever was going to be supervising. And that was, we have the HHS order now that allows that temporarily, but
well,
that
and,
was deemed
and I was
not a,
and I was not a fan of where the task force landed on that final decision. I thought it was ridiculous. I'm the son of a nurse and a pharmacist. If I have a question about how to properly administer a vaccine, guess which parent I'm going to ask? It's not the pharmacist. So, but that being said, what hung us up there wasn't the preceptor language. It was the immunization authority, which said you got to be supervised by a pharmacist, and that's what hung us up. Is the immunization specific language and not the preceptor language.
Is this an issue with the definition of supervision?
Now, I would propose we not mess with that definition because it's worked at least for 25 years or more.
It says the pharmacist is present.
Oh, if it says it's present, then frankly,
And
the schools and ACPE have been violating that for decades.
Obviously, like presence, it doesn't say physical. It doesn't say right next to you. It doesn't say in the room. It could be virtual or in the building. But I'm just like, if we're talking about how preceptorship is actually supervised, I think we've all had the same experience as you, where our preceptor is not, we're not attached to their hip 24/7.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of anything that talks about supervision. If it says direct, has to be present, looking very carefully at that, and making that more open-ended if it makes sense for patient safety and educational outcomes.
It sounds like we need to do a little bit more research, particularly around the preceptor conversation, to see if there is the ability for a non-pharmacist to supervise an intern. So perhaps we put this one in the parking lot for today so we can get through the other sections, and maybe that can be a further discussion, give Kim a chance to review that perhaps with Jean and see if there's anything else we would need to consider from a statutory standpoint. Does that sound good to everybody?
Lori, I'd be happy to reach out to both of the colleges too, just to find out. It's been a while since we had that conversation, but just what would they like to see as far as experiential training, and is there any roadblocks in the rules that we need to maybe think about? Because I know that conversation came up. I just can't recall all of the issues.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Mark. I think that's why we landed where we did, in particular for immunization, was the fact that it had to be ordered by a pharmacist. It couldn't be ordered by another provider. All right. Anything else on 304 or 305? All right, next up is 401. I think that was Emily.
Yes. Cam, I don't know if you want to put up the language that I sent you, or if you're able to do that.
I can. Let me just pull it up here real quick.
Awesome, thank you. I don't think I'll be as fast as Karen, unfortunately. Awesome, thank you. So this first section, 401, is I feel like it's kind of similar to the reports one, because it's all about timeframes for paperwork to be submitted for special requests and how long the review windows can be. It's super detailed, and I'll be honest, I had to make like a flow chart to understand what the actual like back and forth timeframes were. And I think that there's a couple options. It's like discussing if we think it's necessary. It does look like there may be a statutory requirement to report the timeframes to process. So we could have a discussion on if you just want to leave it at that, or if we could just post it on the website or something, as opposed to keeping the rule, or we could make edits to the rule to just be more streamlined. Thoughts on just that on a surface level?
In just my 2 seconds, it seems like an awful lot of space for a whole bunch of rules that I'm not sure are necessary.
It reads like an SOP. Like it really reads like, okay, petitioner sends this, then the board does this. And I'm just not quite sure if it's necessary. I'm also curious if staff thinks it's necessary.
No, we can certainly streamline it. We get special requests all the time. I think we triage them appropriately.
As soon as someone who sends in a special request and you in turn request certain things of them, you impose deadlines, you ask for documentation or support, they'll say, well, where does it say that I have to do that? And then if you have a rule that lays out the process and what is required, it's much easier on staff to support their positions, to back up the request to the individual if they have a rule that they can point to and says, this is where it's required.
Okay, that's helpful.
Are we able to meet these timeframes, Cam? I know we request things far before 15 days or 30 days to get on an agenda at this point.
For the most part, we do. I think everybody understands the timeframes and the fact that the board has so much material to go to. So we also weigh that in. And I would say, I'd say for the most part, we do meet the time periods.
I think this rule is crazy and convoluted because we actually submitted a special request to have the automated boxes restocked by a nurse or have them put the cubies in. And then we had to do the citation. We had to write a letter. We had to get a response. Then we had to get our calendars. Maybe if you just had a form that they could submit that gives a citation or a short place for an explanation and send it in, because we even had to get our attorneys to review the request before we sent it to the board because we didn't want to mess it up. That's crazy. So maybe the board could come up with a special request form for board approval. And that way they're all the same, or they're all a standard format.
I believe there is a request form.
We have a deviation request form on our website.
Can we use that for a special request? Is a special request different than a deviation?
Special request can be, I want to lift my probation or my suspension, and it can also include deviation requests as well. So they come in all different shapes and sizes.
Okay.
So I was actually thinking about that question too when I was doing this, and this one does exclude the probation and the suspension requests. So I actually think this is just for deviations. It's in letter A, the last sentence. It says that it's not for like the licensure stuff.
Yeah, it's more specific than that, though. It's not about probation, suspension, or revocation. But if someone says, for example, the complaint committee met, the board proposed a consent agreement, the respondent says, I'd really like a chance
Correct.
to discuss this in an informal setting, because I have more information I'd like the board to do. So it's a respondent requested conference. That would be a special request, and that we're not at probation, suspension, or revocation yet. It might just be a fine, you know.
That's helpful.
Could this be something that if you want to make a special request, you get the instruction at that time versus keeping it in the rules? Just curious.
I don't know. To Jean's point, special requests are incredibly valuable to the group of licensees and permittees. And the board's always very generous at hearing them. Granted, there are some that they're like, look, we just don't have time at this meeting. But my experience is they've done a pretty good job triaging the ones that could wait a couple more months and kind of put them on the list for a couple more months. To Jean's point, you know, when someone gets angry and says, show me why I can't meet at this meeting on this request I have today, there's a sense of urgency. You know, the staff can say, look, it's not magic. We need time to review it, and here's the rule, it says so. I don't know. I don't feel like a lawyer who does a lot of special requests, I don't feel like I've ever been hampered by the content of this rule. Could we clean it up a little bit? Sure, but I don't know you have to mess with it that much.
Yeah, I haven't had issues with the process at all either. It was more so just around like, do we need to have a rule for this, and does it have to be this much detail? It sounds like we want to have timeframes in here because it helps the staff, and it helps people understand, like, you know, what to expect. So
can I just sort of comment on that? And I'm not opposed to keeping it in here. That's fine if we need to do it. But we have lots of other timelines that we don't have rules for, to my knowledge. I think you have to put in any material you want on the agenda applications 4 weeks in advance. There's a whole bunch of practical rules that we have put in place over the years. I understand it's easier from a defensive perspective, and if that's what we want to keep it in, that's fine. And maybe it's just any request for a variance or special request has to be submitted, 6 weeks in advance, and don't need all the nuances. But we've got lots of other timelines, and people get upset on those too, and we don't have rules on those. And I hope the rules just don't become so detailed as to have every one of those.
yeah, I think like at the very core, there could be something that just adds up all of these timelines and says a complete application for special request must be submitted X days before a board meeting date. I think that's at the core.
Emily, I think you've brought up this point before too, especially when you're licensed in multiple states. If each state is so prescriptive on 10 days, 7 days, 15 days, 30 days, it sometimes gets really confusing when it's that prescriptive on trying to remember all the dates and times when you have to file certain things. This is a little bit different of a case, maybe a little bit more robust. I would support less prescriptive. I think kind of to Roger's point.
I like Emily's suggestion of making it a little more simple. Looking at a deadline prior to a published board meeting must be received prior to this date, but then leaving the board some room, or if received after this date and staff agrees there's some urgency, can be accepted later, but that's at the discretion of the board. I don't know, that could be a much shorter regulation, but also give staff the cover it needs for, hey, you missed the deadline. And I don't agree that this is an emergency.
So Emily, your suggested language is what you have underlined and stricken, correct?
No, so that was just like, if we just want to leave it as is, just a couple ways to streamline things. But if the will of everyone here is to really reduce things and make it something like this needs to be, these types of requests needs to be submitted at like this many days in advance, I'm happy to revise that way. Or
Kim-
staff can, since it's really theirs.
Kim, you have guidance now on the website that requires documentation to be submitted, X number of weeks before the board meeting. You could just add special requests to that list, do away with the rule and just say that special requests and supporting documentation have to be submitted to the board within X number of days on a form or using a form provided by the board. And then try to streamline and have a form available for special requests, not deviations.
Okay, and we can do it as a policy then, you think?
Yeah, an internal policy setting deadlines for submission to the board.
And then it wouldn't be in rules, so it gives the board some flexibility depending on what's going on.
And then if you guys start whining about special requests not getting on the agenda, I'm going to remind you of this day.
Mark, Roger.
We're already whining about it. Stuff, you're busy. Stuff gets bumped. That's life in the big city.
All right, Gene, you want to work with me on that? We'll figure it out.
Yep.
Okay. You make note of that here real quick.
Do I get that we're cutting 2 more pages? Wow.
Possibly, yeah, that sounds good.
Commissioned per page.
All right, Emily, you also had 402.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this one's a whole lot more detailed. So this section is around the responsibilities of the pharmacist when dispensing a prescription or intern. First things first, I got rid of the term graduate intern in all the places, and it was a lot of places. So moving through, I'd love to discuss a few of the things that I removed. So in A1, if the technician delegation rule passes, a pharmacist or intern will no longer be the only person who can receive an order. It seems maybe premature to strike it right now, but like it will need to be changed if that rule does pass as it is now. And in A2, it says that pharmacists need to record the name of the individual who calls in an order. I actually think that might be better suited to just be in the prescription requirements section. It's all over the transfer section, but not necessarily for new orders. Anyone have questions on that?
I think the only thing in your first comment, Emily, if we include technicians in that discussion, it doesn't become a delegating authority, it becomes an authority.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think since we still have that delegating language, that can be a subcategory of this, and I don't think we'd be in conflict with it.
That makes total sense to me.
The second part, I agree with you. It could be in a prescription requirement section.
Cool.
But leaving it here doesn't exclude it from being a delegated task. It actually kind of further says that it can be delegated.
Correct. But to collect an individual's name can go in a prescription requirement section, I would think.
Great. Okay. So no need to act on 1. Next here down to A4. it talks about adding notes to the profile, whereas number 3 talks about maintaining a proper profile. It feels like those should just be combined. If there are applicable notes, the pharmacist assumes responsibility for making sure the notes are in the profile. Just cleans it up a little bit. And then under 5, there was one little bit of cleanup language. So 5C is validating use of unusual quantities of medication. It feels like that might be a little bit short set. Like that may not be the proper term for like doing proper DUR. So I just wrote utilization history instead. And then I had a little bit more of like a question on letter D, which was, verifying the prescription based on the signature. And that's the only thing in this section that kind of points to validating that the prescription is, legally valid or not forged or anything. And that just seems a little interesting to me. Like, I don't know if signature is really the only way. So I was wondering if people would consider maybe doing like something more broad, like reviewing for the like legality of the prescription order, or reviewing for red flags or something like that.
I like medical practitioner signature. If you throw in something vague like red flags, I struggle with that all the time as a defense attorney. Well, what's a red flag? Who publishes them? What's the source?
And the
It's
expectation
subjective.
and the expectation under the CFR federally is that the pharmacist checks for appropriateness with corresponding responsibility anyway. So do we need to restate that?
Agreed. I wouldn't want to.
Okay. Helpful.
I thought you were going to say, Emily, how do we know that that's the medical practitioner signature? Which has always been my question.
I'm not going down that road.
I don't know what that doctor's signature looks like.
Because
Like,
you can't read it, so it's a valid signature.
there you
That's
go.
how you know
Okay.
it is. Yeah. Got it. Cool. Next item I have here is number 8.
Before we go on,
Oh, yes.
okay, question. On E, the frequency of refills, would that not be included in C, the utilization history? Or no?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need it.
When you say utilization history, I think how it's been used, not how many times.
But if somebody's refilling something every 15 days and they should only be filling it every 30, that should cause a question for some firms, for some drugs, I would say, for a pharmacist.
Right.
I thought when Emily was describing her change in C, I thought she talked about like the number of refills. And so I as a layperson, I didn't know if E was kind of the same thing.
I think it kind of is.
Can't we just say under C, drug utilization review? Because that is defined, isn't it?
Yeah, why don't we just say that the pharmacist is required to do DUR? I mean,
Yeah.
and all the components that come with DUR, checking for allergies, checking for appropriateness of therapy, checking for frequency of refills. I don't know that we need to delineate everything that's included in a DUR. A DUR is a DUR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm fully on board with that.
Yeah, so you could get rid of A through E altogether and just put in after, reference the part of the rule that talks about drug utilization review. Verify the legality and pharmaceutical feasibility of something a drug based upon the requirements found in, and then wherever drug utilization review is.
technically, wouldn't 6 and 7 be part of that too?
Mhm.
Verify if you were to state it that way. So 6 and 7 really wouldn't be needed. Verify that a dosage was within the proper dosage limits. Interpret a prescription order, which includes exercising professional judgment and determining whether to dispense a prescription.
Yes.
That should all be
Yep.
part of DUR.
Yep.
Yep. And I am almost positive that sums up the DUR items in this rule. Great. Next here is number 8. So it says that pharmacists can compound, mix, combine, or otherwise prepare and package prescription medication needed to dispense individual prescription orders. And I'm not sure this is only a pharmacist or intern's task.
Oh, it's also identified in technicians that they can compound it. So it is spelled out under theirs as well.
Okay. Because the next one says package, prepackage or supervise the prepackaging of drugs by a tech.
That's true. I think this is the only place in the rule that talks about pre-packaging, which is different than repackaging, which is what number 8 does, and compounding.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that a little bit in the definitions, like how we don't really use the term prepackaging that much. It was in the hospital definitions. Let me check my notes.
But can trainees compound?
No. they
No,
can't.
it's only techs, yeah. You have to separate that out.
Well, pre-packaging doesn't tell me they can compound. 8 tells me pharmacists
Yeah,
can
no,
compound.
I was saying if 8 and 9 would be combined.
Oh, I'm not proposing combining them. I'm a big fan of keeping number 9 is all I'm trying to do here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just like, I guess maybe that's the distinguishing factor. Maybe it's the reason that they're separate is because for number 9, techs and trainees can do it, whereas for number 8, only techs can do it. But I still could we format it the same way and say pharmacists can compound, mix, combine, or supervise compounding, mixing, combining by a technician, not a trainee?
Well, to Cam's point, this appears in the technician scope of practice anyway.
But look at 9, it's spelled out.
Right, and I think that's because 9 sort of stands alone. I don't think that exists in the technician piece. And I guess we're here cleaning things up, but my guess is if you look at the regulatory history here, this was something that needed to be added. Rather than put it in more than one place, we stuck it all here for simplicity.
Okay.
I think it reads a little strange. Like if you're saying a tech can do this and the other one it's not called out, it just seems a little strange, but.
No, I get it. If you want to make it all look the same formatting wise, I understand your point. I have no objection to doing that if you wanted to mess with it.
Well, also this header talks about students or interns, and then it's not called out for interns, but it's called out for techs.
I think it's because it's actually, I mean, in a way, it's saying that interns can either do this act or supervise the act.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If it has purpose the way that it's written, that's fine. But to me, it just stuck out. I'm like, there must be a reason for these being different, but I just wasn't privy to it. So
I think they should be written the same way, but. Either way, either inclusive of both or not inclusive.
I have a concern about E, and then under 9E, there are packaging machines at nursing homes that they just hit the button and it'll package up all like the 8 a.m. meds for the residents who need them. Then the package is just torn off and walked down the hall. So does this not, is this just for inside the pharmacy automation? Because they can't run out to the facility all the time.
I don't know that this is even with automation. This could be done. Well, E is automated packaging.
Well,
systems, but
9E.
yeah.
Well, what I think E is doing is it's directly related to Section 9 above it, which says, hey, pharmacists and people you supervise, pharmacists and interns, you can prepackage things. You can also supervise technicians and technician trainees to prepackage things. When you do that, here are items A through E. E says, hey, we got no objections to using an automated packaging system to make prepackaging, but we want you to manually initial the completed label or a written log when you do that. And so it's not about automated packaging for everything. It's just when you're using it for prepackaging is how I interpret E.
Okay.
And 9, it calls out tech, trainee, pharmacist.
And
Right.
intern.
Okay. Okay, so
Do you see intern under 9?
Well, 9 relates to what's above it, which is the scope of
But they
practice
call
for
out
pharmacists and
pharmacist.
interns.
I think the
No.
reason it says pharmacist is because it's saying that like it's like adjusting for how that the prior sentence is written.
okay, then would
Oh, I
this,
see what you're saying. It does say pharmacist. A pharmacist shall. All right, sorry. I'm like, where's the C pharmacist?
automated packaging or pre-packaging at the nursing home in the med room when you just hit the button and the strip pack comes out? Because there's no pharmacist or pack or
Would this apply there to like a non like not the practice of pharmacy, and this being under the pharmacist scope section?
So there's lots of other places for long-term care practice in our code and for use of automated technology or automated packaging systems. What's important about 9 is before there was a 9, this concept of pre-packaging, which is I got a big 1,000-count bottle of doxycycline, and I want to make as many 30-count bottles as I can, and just to pull off the shelf and stick a patient-specific label on at a future date. Without the pre-packaging authority, there is no other authority to do that, because we bleed into the repackager manufacturer role, and we didn't want to do that for any pharmacy that has sort of some fast movers and they're tired of every single time making a 30-count bottle and they want to pre-package some. This gave them the authority to do this, and this is incredibly valuable to lots of pharmacies.
Yeah, we did it a
But-
lot
but-
with cough syrups in the wintertime when I was when I worked in a store.
Yep. And so the long-term care issues and the first dose machines and the use of automated pill counters and packaging systems, there are lots of other places that address those types of situations. What prepackaging did and is allowed for it, number 9 allows for prepackaging, and E says, and we recognize that you might have a robot do this, and we're okay with that too, as long as you initial the labels or have a written log to say who the heck did the final verification on this.
okay, so this wouldn't require somebody from the pharmacy to initial the whole strip pack out of the facility? Because, or are we just going to make a whole nother section for care outside of the pharmacy or packaging outside of the pharmacy?
Well, this particular section I don't think has any bearing on the use of RxNow machines and Pyxis machines and satellite pharmacies or long-term care centers. This is just the act of pre-packaging. I don't consider those machines that make one unit of use at a time to be what is contained here. That's a different section. Those are different sections of our rules.
Okay, because the way it's written, automated packaging systems. So that could be those individual systems that do the strip pack, not, and the ones that take a bottle of 1,000 capsules and put them into 30, bottles of 30.
I agree with you. So if you're doing pre-packaging, which is making unit of use things before you have a patient name to put on them, yeah, you gotta be in compliance with this rule.
Okay, but not if it's patient specific at the facility.
No, patient specific is not pre-packaging. I would call that dispensing.
Okay, got it.
Or repackaging in that case.
So on 8 and 9, are we going to just clean up that language so it's parallel and makes sense and not overly wordy? Like 8 could read perform or supervise technicians compounding mix.
I think that makes sense.
Actually, I worry about 8. So there's compound. Compound is just within the scope of a technician, not a trainee.
Yeah.
Mix can mean reconstitution. Trainees can do that. Combine is probably compound, so that's just technician. Otherwise, prepare and package the prescription. Well, now we bring trainees in again. So I don't think you're gonna. You're mixing things that sometimes a trainee can do and sometimes can't, and that's one of the challenges with 8.
Maybe the terms package and mix or combine need to be removed or somehow like manipulated.
That's not a bad idea.
And just, I should have said this at the beginning, but like this section is so important. And I knew going into it that this was not going to be like my final draft. So I'm taking notes. I'm happy to revise, or if one of the attorneys wants to take it after this, like that's totally fine. But like every line here feels so important that I wanted to kind of have a discussion before I started just striking stuff.
I think you're doing great, Emily. I think
you are doing great. You are doing great. And I like that you didn't mess with 8 because you want to give the pharmacist the broadest scope possible. And then, so the pharmacist is going to be able to do a lot of things, frankly, all of the things, if they're the only ones working that day. And then when you go, okay, but I got 2 kinds of technicians. I've got a technician and I've got a trainee. Well, then you go to their rules and you're like, okay, technician, trainee, you can't compound, you can't combine, but you can be supervised to do these other functions, repackaging, pre-packaging, mixing, things like that. Reconstitution, mix is probably a word that you could put more specificity to. But this is one I've been practicing a long time in both professions, the pharmacy and the legal. I don't remember a time when we've ever went, man, wish number 8 was clearer. And in the absence of that, I don't mind leaving it the way it is.
Then maybe change 9 to just prepackage or supervise the prepackaging of drugs. And then skip the rest of that
Well,
sentence.
number 9, if you make it more like number 8, and I get where you're going, you got to go back to the technician rules, and we can do that. We can remember to do that. Go back to the technician and technician trainee rules and make sure that they've got the ability to prepackage under supervision, because I bet you it's not there.
Wouldn't that be implied if the delegation rule adjudicates?
No,
Okay.
not for trainees because it only addresses technicians.
Right, okay, got it.
I'm kind of the opinion we leave it alone, both of these. Is where my head is at right now.
I'm fine.
I don't
with
know
it.
that I don't know that it's broken.
Makes
But I'm
sense
just
to me.
one opinion.
What are we solving for here other than just trying to clean up a little?
Pretty much it, Roger.
Okay, these ones aren't so long, they're not so bad. I tend to agree with Lori here.
Cool. The only other thing I wanted to mention was under letter E, 9E, initialing a computer stored log. I don't know, like personally, I don't know how necessary it is. Like computers are pretty accurate when you have them do things. I don't know how I would be able to validate if the computer took the correct record of what I did that day. It just seems, it seems a little bit extra work, but it's also not a huge deal. So I just wanted to get people's thoughts on that.
Well, this is one where I ran a pharmacy where we did a lot of prepackaging. And it's been my impression of the enforcement is there were 3 ways that the inspectors would accept the documentation when my robot machine prepackaged. One is we could have the pharmacist initial every single label. We didn't do that. That was a lot of work. 2 is we could have a written log that says, all right, the lot number that we made was verified by this pharmacist, and that was also acceptable. Or if we had a computer printout by which the pharmacist's initials were recorded for that lot, that was the 3rd way.
Is it not captured what pharmacist, like, I don't know, validates the like entry into that machine? Is that why it's necessary to do it after it's dispensed, or the printout?
It depends on your machine.
Yeah, okay.
So if your machine is capable of doing an audit trail, Mark Bozen, MDB, supervised and signed off that this lot is right. He wanted 30,000 doxycycline 100s made into, 30 count vials. This is the lot. Mark was here. Mark signed off that was done correctly. All of those bottles that have this lot number on them are Mark's fault if they're not done right. But there are older technologies that just didn't capture that very well, or it was hard to print out after the fact because not everybody knew how to print out a report. And the inspectors always come on a day when the relief pharmacist is there and doesn't know how to print things out. And so for belt and suspenders, I also had a notebook that was a written log, so that, and because that was easy to do too, and that was just easier to make sure that the inspectors had what they needed when they showed up. If I wasn't there or someone who operated the machine regularly wasn't there who could print out a report. And I think this gives flexibility to people who have older technology and newer technology, and gives them maximum flexibility.
Okay. Good to know. I just wasn't really familiar. All right, next one should be a little bit less controversial. So number 10 is basically like data verification, right? It's making sure that the order entry for a prescription is correct. And instead of, listing all the components of an order, I had just put that the elements required on an order and reference that section are present and accurate.
Any thoughts on that?
I think Emily's change is reasonable.
Any concerns?
I'm just gonna take 2 seconds. I actually like the list of things that are supposed to be checked because I think it helps the students and the new pharmacists understand it. I think Emily's change is absolutely correct legally. I just like that it's there somewhere that people know what these are all the things that you're supposed to do.
What does the group want to do? Leave it as is or make the suggested change from Emily?
Roger, are those steps mentioned anywhere else of what they're supposed to do?
I'm
Because I
not
agree with you
sure.
that that is important, but I thought maybe that might be in what constitutes a prescription or somewhere else.
It's close. Like, I'm not sure in 11, next one, we need to go and do it again when we get there. But I just think somewhere in the rules, we need to have this at least once.
I'm fine with keeping as is. Especially, I mean, if it's helpful to students, then that feels important.
There are a lot more things that are requirements on N407 than are there that are required to be checked when you compare the two.
I also, I was thinking about it and I'm like, 407 is so long. Like there's probably going to be changes to 407. And I was wondering if it would be better to just reference one instead of have two lists that you need to maintain.
This one might fall under the category of it's not broken, I
Okay,
think.
that's cool.
What does the group think?
We could leave it based upon the discussion. Leave it as the way it was before.
So this next one, I think, needs a lot of discussion, and maybe it's just my misunderstanding or my confusion. So this is around label checks. And when we were going over definitions, it says the dispensing pharmacist is the pharmacist who performs the label check. And when we were having that discussion, we all took away the understanding that that's the pharmacist that does PV2, so product verification. When I actually read this section and read the description of what a label check is, that sounds like a pharmacist doing data verification and DUR. And I know that this is like really baked into dispensing. It's really baked into like automation is like a really big part of this. So I think it warrants a lot of discussion. And I'm curious the group's thoughts on the concept of the label check.
Thoughts from the group on that?
Or like maybe from staff, like what do you interpret this label check to be, and who is the person performing it? And I think I'm coming from like a voice of working in a setting where split verification happens, right? So the person that is checking the product may be a different person who's checking the data and DUR.
I agree with you. The difference between PV1 and PV2, and oftentimes it's multiple persons. And you wouldn't necessarily expect the person doing PV2 to check the work of PV1 because that defeats the purpose of it. Now, they may find inaccuracies that would lend you to go back and look at it as a double check, but I don't think that that should solely rest on the last person.
And the way that this is written with 11 and 12, I feel like it almost is like it's PV2, right? It's calling it a final accuracy check. And then it talks about technology assisted verification, which is a product verification task. But in these two sections, there's a lot of PV1 work happening as well, which is why I'm confused. Maybe it's just the fact that it's combining them together and calling a final check both PV1 and PV2. But I just want to make sure that this allows that to be different people.
No, I agree with you, Emily. As it stands right now, it does not appear to allow a PV1 to do things that a PV2 can rely on. 11 reads like PV2, you're responsible for accuracy, essentially, data entry was done right and drug utilization was done right. It's asking PV2 to do everything.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually say like none of this says PV2 to me at all. Like there's no product, there's no anything like that, even though I think that's what it's trying to talk about.
Oh, it clearly tells me this is the final accuracy check. Strikes me as the last pharmacist, whether it's PV2, PV3, PV4, the last man or woman to touch it who has a pharmacist license. You're responsible for all that stuff here in 11. You can't blame drug utilization review misgivings on a previous PV step. That's how that reads to me.
That's concerning, but also like how does this apply to the pharmacies that have waivers to do canister level verification? Or is this one of the provisions that's waived in those deviations?
Well, canister verification strikes me as something a little different. but still 11 says, hey, even if the robot created this 30 count bottle, you better open it up, look inside, and make sure that's what you think it is.
Or what about your partner that checked the first part of the prescription before you came in today and you checked the product?
No, what I'm saying is I'm agreeing with you that it probably needs some help and that it's not fair in a system that has more than one person looking at it to blame it all on the last person. But I feel like number 11 does that.
And I don't think that's how the staff has done this in the past, right? If a mistake is made,
Agreed.
An unrelated person that happened to touch the prescription usually isn't brought in for a complaint, from what I've seen, at least.
I'm not, I guess, seeing how it's all on one person. The way that I read it, because it's under the section of what pharmacists can do, that they just want to make sure that the rule is sure that the pharmacist is the one doing the final accuracy, a pharmacist, whether it's PB1, PB2.
Do we have suggestions on how to make this language better?
I think it may technically apply to this whole section, but this is just the place where it feels like it's like the most troubling, because there's multiple steps wrapped up in each item, whereas the other ones are individual steps. And I think what we're all saying is that pharmacists are responsible for the accuracy of the step that they perform. And maybe it's not specific to these two provisions, but it just feels like that applies the most in these. So maybe it needs to be a holistic part for the whole section.
I think I go back to, I'm just going to add, I think Kelly is right here. This is saying who has to do these things, and I don't think it has to be one person. It is a pharmacist or intern supervised pharmacist who has to do this, but it could be multiple different people. It just can't be a tech.
Correct. But one of the things, I'm not disagreeing with the concept, but I worry about 11 says number 11 says make a final accuracy check of the completed prescription label. And then I worry about the things that are in that series. They're not just making an accuracy check of the final prescription label. They're also doing an accuracy check of the drug utilization review and the data entry. But data entry was discussed in 10 above. So I wonder if, and then previous to that, in other sections above that, there were other functions that a pharmacist does. And so maybe 11 should be more like something to the effect of a pharmacist or pharmacists involved in the dispensing of the prescription shall be, or I don't know, the pharmacists involved in the previous sections, the verification of data entry. So number 10 is essentially PV1, and number 11 is PV2. If we make 11 say, make a final accuracy check, leave it as is. If more than one pharmacist participated in the dispensing of the prescription, then then each is responsible for their role. I'm not being very clever with my language, but I'd feel more comfortable if it recognized that, hey, there might have been, in fact, there's usually 2 people, sometimes even more, depending on how big your process is. Each needs to be responsible for his or her own work.
Could we add a section in here in general, not necessarily in 11, but at the end of the section that just says nothing in this section prohibits, multiple pharmacists from doing multiple, I don't know, tasks within the supervision or something like that?
Yeah, I like where you're going. 1 or more pharmacists may be responsible for compliance with this section.
Or is it just
as it relates to an individual? Yeah, go ahead.
Or do you just address the product verification? So the verification of the product must be completed unless it's done under technology assisted product verification.
That's kind of where I was going, because the thing is, and maybe it's my own, maybe this is a me issue and I'm the only one confused here, but this says to make a final accuracy check of the completed prescription label. So to me, that's a sticker. And then it says, including all these PV1 things. I don't see products here at all. Nothing says to make sure that the right product is in the labeled container.
I can also see Mark's perspective and Emily's both in this. Mark, it sounds like you have some experience either defending on this one. Kelly's language, I think, was nice that it didn't specify the exact steps. It wasn't overly prescriptive, but it was alluding to it wasn't all inclusive of just one person, but there may be multiple people involved in this. Because when you start folding in the label plus the DUR review, plus handwriting, it's pretty small on my screen, et cetera, that gets to be pretty cumbersome, I think, and could be easily misconstrued that it was the one pharmacist's responsibility.
I don't think Mark or Roger have ever had an issue with this. I think if a pharmacist 1 made an error, board held pharmacist 1 accountable. Pharmacist 2 made the error, board held pharmacist 2 accountable. We may be overthinking this one, I personally think.
There's a lot of brain power here, Cam, to overthink it, so we can overthink it.
I agree with you, Mark. We can. Or Matt.
If people feel comfortable with it as is, then that's completely fine with me. I think I really brought this forward as a policy discussion to see if people understood this the way that I did, or if anyone was confused or concerned that it could require one person to do all of those steps.
I doubt anyone thinks that their role isn't what they're responsible for. Is that a problem that currently exists?
I mean, I've had a lot of people raise questions to me before, but I tell them that's not usually how the board enforces on things.
So do we want to include a statement like that somewhere within this section of the rule that the pharmacist is responsible for the portion of the work that they do? So if the pharmacist types the prescription wrong and there isn't another pharmacist that checks it, they're responsible for the checking in the DUR and the product verification portion. So do we want to make any changes here?
I'm supportive of delineating that exception that you made, Lori, and similar to what Kelly said.
Yeah, and I am too, and I get it. Cam's right. I haven't defended a pharmacist who's been thrown under the bus because they were PV2. The board brings in technicians and PV1s and PICs and owners, and that's probably the right thing to do. But I worry about the next board, the next 9 people, and the next executive director, and what do they do? And I try to think ahead on those types of things and try to make it very clear as to what the intent of this committee was in 2021 for the people who, won't remember who we are.
Well, just to reassure you or scare you, Mark, I'm here to stay, buddy.
You're going to retire at some point. That's the benefit of, you got to enjoy your life at some point. It happens.
Who says I'm not enjoying life now, buddy?
Well, good for you. Good for you. I'm looking forward to retirement. I'm enjoying my life too, but I got to believe that retirement's better. And if it's not, then what's the point? Why does everybody make such a big deal out of it?
So where are we with adding just another line of language for responsibility for the step?
I like the idea of maybe adding a whole new line toward the end that makes it clear. I'm happy to propose some language for our next meeting or for staff to review in the meantime of trying to make it more clear that it is acceptable for a pharmacy permittee or a group of pharmacists to engage individually in any one of the above, as long as it's delineated in the policies and procedures and there's a way to track who did what, something like that. I promise it'll be more pithy when I write it out.
Hey, that's tricky wording.
It's not pithy yet. That's why it's tricky. I'm going to make it more pithy.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, Mark. All right, section 12, is there any updates we'd like to see there?
That was the same discussion that I had, at least. Kind of like encompassed the 2 sections.
Okay, carry on, Emily.
Section 13, I thought should also be in the prescription requirements section. I think like somebody should put the prescription number on it, but I don't see why it has to be the pharmacist. Or prescription records or prescription order requirements. And there's prescription record, like there's kind of random requirements for prescription numbers throughout the code. It's not necessarily saying every prescription has to have a prescription number, which probably should be a rule, but it's more so like things saying like you need to be able to provide a list of prescription numbers to the inspector upon request or something like that. So I just don't think it fits here.
Yeah, the prescription requirements clearly say it's got to have a number on it, and I don't care who puts the number on it.
To be clear, because I have 407 when we get to it later, the prescription requirements that it goes through really deal with prescription order requirements, what the doctor has to put on it. And the doctor clearly doesn't put the serial number on it.
Yeah, I was thinking records because it talks about prescription numbers in the context of receiving a transfer, but I don't think it actually says it for, the order, and that makes total sense.
I forget, there's somewhere in these rules, and I just can't remember where it is, that prescription all have to have a prescription number and they have to be issued sequentially. I don't remember where it is, but I've used it before.
Okay.
Word sequentially is in there because it's a mess for companies that use multiple different kinds of prescription numbers. We're one of the few states that has that.
Does anyone have concerns with moving it to a place like records? Like computer records or something like that?
No, I know it exists other places in the rule, and I think it's fine that you move it.
Okay. So the next portion is similar. It's already in records. We need to be able to produce all of the fill history and be able to retrieve that at any time. So I don't know why the pharmacist needs to record the fill history. I mean, pharmacy management systems do that now.
But what if we needed to request an additional refill? There'd still need to be documentation of that.
Request an additional refill. Oh, like
So
a
say
renewal.
an exhausted prescription. Wouldn't C handle that?
There's so that's kind of interesting to me. Like it already says that we can receive and reduce written orders, and it doesn't delineate that they're initial orders. So it just felt a little extra to me that we would say it like clearly for refills too. But if we really think like of refills conceptually as like something separate from a like prescription order, then that's fine. Or it could be worked into A1.
The one thing I don't want to lose with this conversation, because it was a relatively recent addition and it made sense, is the ability to reduce to a written or printed form an emailed prescription or other means of communication, or even a fax. I remember fax was a fairly recent addition to our code.
So that's number 15. Why would we write those down?
Because if they're, well, write it down could be reduced to written or printed form. A fax could be printed and then scanned. An email can be printed and then scanned, or other means of communication. And there's this very, and it may be too far in the weeds and too much lawyer stuff, but other means of communication, there's always been, and I get this from Roger, I give you credit for this. Is a telephone on a voice over IP system really a telephone, or is that an internet prescription? And so I always liked other means of communication to anticipate the the prescriptions coming in on my Apple Watch at some point in the future.
And why would it have to be in written or printed form? If it could be housed in an electronic form, why would it have to be printed, right?
That's it. That's why I struck it.
Oh. Well, doesn't the board want the ability for you to print it on demand? Don't they?
How about board approved form? That way it keeps it open to futuristic Apple Watches or whatever you suggest.
But like if you have a computer system that you receive electronic faxes, why would you have to print it? If you could capture that as an electronic image, why would you want somebody to have to print that?
I'm with you. You can always print it if you needed to, though.
Right.
It's in the responsibilities for dispensing a prescription. And I don't want people to feel confused that they need to write or print orders that come in by fax, email, or other means of communication, since the new records rule says that for non-controls, we can store these electronically.
All right, and I might not have been paying attention, and I'll admit it if I wasn't. Did we get rid of the whole, you got to have a hard copy for 30 days rule?
We did.
Good, all right. Then
Yeah, that was like a couple years ago.
Again, 15, I don't know if it's required or not, if that record is reproducible, in what form it comes in, as long as we can print it and we can read it and decipher it, I think we're fine.
I'm fine with it.
Okay, moving on. The only other
And the
edit to,
proposal is to strike it. Yes. 13, 14, and 15 is what I'm hearing.
yes.
Okay.
The only other thing under A that I've changed here is there's two separate sections, 17 and 18, that require us to keep record of what pharmacist or intern dispenses a prescription, one for original prescriptions and one for refills. That feels like it could be the same line, so I just combined them. Any concerns?
You got unanimous support.
Great. All right. So now I'm sorry, I have another lengthy discussion, I think, ahead of us, but item C, 1 through 4, it says this is the list of things that pharmacists must counsel on when counseling is required. And that's, new prescriptions, any change, or, just whenever anyone wants counseling. And this is prescriptive about what things must be covered each time. I think there's a question before us that we should consider is like, do we want to be this prescriptive of what a consultation includes? I understand all of these things are super important, especially for a new medication, but also understanding that, maybe this is just a question that somebody's asking about one thing about their medication. Are all of these things technically required? Do we want to say that the board decides what counseling is, or does the pharmacist use judgment?
Emily, you raised a good point, but I always read these as shall include at a minimum. That these were the minimums that you had to do. Obviously, you can talk about lots more.
That
Yeah,
makes sense.
I agree with Roger. This was always my impression of the minimum. And it, to that point, it's always good to understand when you've achieved compliance so that there's not an argument about it later.
Okay. I hear that.
It wasn't as lengthy as you thought, Emily.
Great. The next one is really similar. It's letter E, and that's things that may be included in counseling. Kind of similar discussion. Is it necessary? Do we want to spell this out?
I think
So
it's
I'm a
fine.
big fan of if it's optional, why document it?
And maybe we put the words oral consultation shall include at a minimum here. And
Yeah.
that's, in C. And then that way we can get rid of E because they can add on to the counseling. if
Anything they wanted. Yeah.
Right. So then we don't really need E because
I
then
like
it's
that.
defined.
I like
Makes total
that.
sense.
Who will become the responsibility of the pharmacy schools to teach about.
Okay, great. Okay, so next is like G and H are very closely related. And this is interesting to me. And I think this may be the only time I've seen this is and I think this is what it says, correct me if I'm wrong, that counseling should be documented every time counseling does happen and doesn't happen. Whereas other states I've seen just documenting refusals, understanding that Arizona requires counseling for all new prescriptions. So it's like, it's assumed that if a refusal is not documented, that counseling occurred.
I agree with you, Emily. I think the documentation requirements are steeper in Arizona than they are in other states. Like, I don't know, do we really care the reason why counseling was not performed from a documentation standpoint? If we see somebody that's just outright not counseling on a regular basis, does that matter, or is that just a reason to say it wasn't done? And then is it really necessary to document the name of the person that received the denial and all those kinds of things, or is it just counseling was performed, yes, no? I don't know, what does the group think here?
I'll give you two thoughts, just a quick thought. I think counseling is the last clear chance that we have to prevent patient errors. It's one of the most important things that goes on. Arizona is very clear that we're not an offer to counsel state, but we're a counseling required state. But we have relatively limited required counseling, and it has to be a new prescription for a change or therapy issues that are there. I like the idea that we document it, and I like the idea that we document when it's not done. Because again, it's not the majority of prescriptions that counseling occurs. It doesn't have to be done on any refill. It doesn't have to be done on a number of new ones. So I think the documentation ends up being limited. Now, you guys tell me if you think it's worthwhile. If the reason documentation was those patient refused, I mean, isn't that the only reason it would be we would document it, that it wasn't necessary?
Well, what if it was a really sensitive product and it wasn't the patient that picked up the prescription? What if there was a language barrier? What if I do see other reasons potentially why counseling would not be performed.
Wouldn't it be good to know that?
So document anything other than a refusal?
That makes sense to me, because I think the majority of refusals, at least in my experience, are true refusals. They say, nope, I'm good, right? I do not want to speak with you after you've tried to counsel them. But the smaller subset of things does seem to be these other barriers, which maybe those are worth documenting. And I think most people would, right? Like it's something out of the ordinary like that.
So do we want to make a change here? It seems like the majority of the group thinks what we have is okay.
It feels important to have like outpatient and or community / retail weigh in here, because this is like, I'm curious as to the burden for recording both scenarios.
I would say comparing Arizona to other states that I work with boards, Arizona's documentation requirements are much higher than others. We don't have the ability to use the system capture in Arizona like we use in some other states.
And the burden of documenting it is high. That's why just get initials and a line through the whole day.
Right, because they're writing down each individual prescription number.
We also have to keep in mind, guys, we have to look at it from the board's perspective, more and a public safety perspective, not a burden perspective.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I actually don't have an opinion here. I just wanted to discuss it because I hadn't seen this before. So that's my only thought here.
As a person who's supervised lots of pharmacists in the community setting, I had a hard time enforcing compliance, getting the pharmacists to go to the counter when they're supposed to, and have a meaningful offer of counsel to the patient. And one of the ways I used to motivate them was all of the examples of the discipline that occurred for pharmacists when a medication error happened. And among the things that did not go well for that pharmacist when they presented their defense to the board was they didn't document whether or not they counseled, and the patient says the pharmacist didn't talk to me. And so I said, look, by having you do something overt that says you counseled them, puts them in that mode of, well, I better counsel, or I better get a bona fide refusal. I don't know. I mean, I'm supportive of keeping it the way it is.
I'm okay with keeping it the way that it is as well.
Okay,
I think we
great.
should keep.
One other
Awesome, thank
policy
you.
discussion before we move on counseling. Do we feel like our rules address the ability to do like a virtual type setting of counseling? I think we've learned a lot with COVID that counseling might be able to occur different ways other than just face to face. So think like a virtual platform of some type, like where a patient could get counseling via FaceTime type thing, not necessarily FaceTime because I don't know if that's HIPAA compliant, but virtual counseling is allowed in our telepharmacy rules. But could counseling be performed before a patient picks up a prescription as long as it was appropriately documented with the way that our rules exist today? Or is that something that we need to address with counseling? Because I can see more of those types of things happening in the future, as well as even like recorded videos, right? Some of the manufacturers and things like that have products available where there's links that can be downloaded by the patient. That is much more extensive counseling.
I wouldn't think of pre-recorded. It's not to take its place of a counsel, right? It would just be supplemental.
Yeah, it can be supplemental. But I do think that there could be a place for virtual counseling that could be performed before a patient picks up a prescription that would be meaningful for a patient, probably even more so than, for example, at a counter at 6 o'clock when the patient's busy and just wants to get home.
Right.
So,
No, I mean,
Go ahead, Kristen, sorry.
I was just going to say, doesn't that ability already exist?
It does, with the exception of H2. We may need to modify that slightly. But to your point, Lori, I think virtual prior to the prescription being picked up, or during or after, it should be irrelevant if we can clear up number 2 a little bit.
Yes, we would probably need to clean up picks up a prescription.
Correct.
I'm just trying to think of all the future technologies that might be available to patients to offer different types of options.
To your point about virtual, I don't think it prohibits, it just says oral consultation, and oral can be taken virtually over the phone or whatever it may be.
So do we want to just strike picks up a prescription here under 2? Because would it matter if it was before the prescription was? I mean, I would assume we would want it before the prescription was like handed over to the patient, ideally.
In D3, it says that pharmacists can use professional judgment to kind of like provide alternative counseling at another time and another method. Would that cover that?
the address is after pickup, but not before.
And then it's 3 says at a later time. I think either way, H will probably need to be cleaned up.
Suggestions on cleanup there?
I think 2 is all about the refusal. So what I'm picturing 2 as 2 is still consistent with what we've been talking about. If you offer oral consultation contemporaneous with the pickup, or you're like, hey, look, your other option is I can tie into your heads-up display in your car ride on the way home and talk to you about it. And the patient says, no, I don't want that. And I'm joking, obviously. But if the patient refuses contemporaneous and after the fact consultation, and they do that at the time of pickup,
Well, why not before, right? So say the pharmacy has the ability to consultation before they pick up their prescription, and then they just swing right through at 6 o'clock and they've already been counseled. Gives them the opportunity to potentially ask other questions later too.
I think Mark's point
No,
is
that's my point though, but
H1
but
covers
number-
it, right, Mark?
I think it does. Number 2 is just saying
Or,
when you have
yeah.
to document the refusal.
It says
strikes me
or,
that
yeah.
Number two is you document the refusal at the time of pickup at the latest. So Lori, if you offered counseling before they came, they're like, no, I've had this a million times. I'm totally cool. Or, you know, I'm a brain surgeon and I know this stuff better than you. But you have to document the refusal. And the last point, you know, you have to document the refusal, you know, at the point of delivery or pickup. Maybe it's delivery. I don't know.
And it's clear that mail order has exception to this.
They have their own
There's a
section.
different section for that.
They do have their own
Okay.
section.
That's under I think.
But Lori, to your discussion about other forms of counseling, yeah, H1 covers it after Mark had pointed out the refusal is identified in 2.
Yeah, because it's 1 or 2,
Correct.
or 3, or
Yep.
and 4.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because, like I said, I can see a lot more of these types of technologies popping up over time.
So I don't think there's any change needed, to be honest.
Okay, good.
And that's actually all I had. Any other discussion points on the remaining items? It's like I through L.
Emily, is yours the one about also providing written information about prescriptions?
Yep. So that is, it's letter I. So that's when
All right.
it's provided outside of the pharmacy. Does this?
Okay.
This should like apply to drive-through too, right?
I think it applies to drive-through. The section that I'm hoping we get to talk about, and it might not be your section, is the section that requires and the sort of patient information leaflet, and where we get hung up all the time is for a compounded medication, and presenting written information about a compounded medication is always extremely difficult. And but it's not this section. I'll raise it when we get to that section.
Well, there is the requirements of the written leaflet for drugs presented outside the pharmacy, and that's I 1 through 5.
There's also a section though, and Cam, help me out if I'm not remembering right. There's also a provision that requires the delivery and pickup at the pharmacy to include written information about the drug?
There is, I have to look for it, Mark. I don't have it, but there is.
I'll find it, and if we don't address it in the coming meetings, I'll bring it up. I'll find it in the meantime. You don't have to look for it.
I believe Emily, I don't think it's applicable to drive-throughs because it does say if the pharmacist is not present, they're still there.
Oh, got it. Does anyone have thoughts on that? I've never used a drive-through before.
My experience is like counseling is performed.
Got it. Okay, just wondering. Any other thoughts on any of the other sections?
I'm not looking at it. I just have a question. What about delivery? Is that
That's what we're talking about.
included?
Yeah,
Like
so
delivery at somebody's home?
yeah, so it actually, what's nice about it is it's just when the drug is presented outside of the pharmacy. So it actually doesn't really delineate between if a person's delivering it, like an employee of the store or a carrier, or if it's going through like a common carrier. They're the same.
And it just says that you have to provide written information and a toll-free number.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, thanks for your patience with me on that one. I'm all done.
We've been going for 2 hours. Does anyone need a bio break?
Take 5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes good for everybody?
Yes.
All right. Everybody back?
I'm here.
I think next section up is Mark's under our 423, 404 unethical practices.
Yep. Let's do 405 first, though. Super short.
Okay.
Cam, I know I sent it to you minutes before the meeting, but, oh, here we go. You're amazing. So this is change of responsibility, and 14 calendar days. What I meant was 10 days. So right now, this is about when there's a new pharmacist in charge. There are 2 requirements. One is related to, well, let's just go one line at a time. I'm sorry. A pharmacist designated as pharmacist in charge for a pharmacy. And I struck the word manufacturer because I don't think manufacturer permits require a PIC anymore in Arizona. So it made sense to remove that. Cam, if I'm wrong about that, we can put it back in. But
Mark, 503B still require a pharmacist to be there.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so forget that. We'll put I was thinking traditional manufacturers. Put manufacturer back in. Or other established shall give immediate notice as defined in, and it describes R423-110. Immediate notice in R423-110 literally means within 24 hours. That's pretty immediate, and I'm wondering if the committee would consider 2 weeks, 10 days, or 14 calendar days, whatever the right consistent language is, but 2 weeks notice when there's a change in pharmacist in charge.
I actually think it should be longer than 2 weeks, Mark.
Fair enough. So let's talk about it. I thought immediate was something that was a bar that might be too difficult to comply with, even though ideally we would if we could.
So, I mean, I think immediate notice if somebody's terminated is good, right? So say a PIC was terminated for theft or a pharmacist was terminated for theft. I think those are all one thing, right? So if you know somebody is terminated for cause that the board should be know about, I think that should be done immediately. But I think the placement of a PIC within an immediate time frame is not really realistic all the time.
Well, so it says terminated here, but terminated in my mind literally means what its definition is. Their job as pharmacist in charge is done. Terminated could be for no other reason than they found another job. Doesn't
True.
necessarily mean for cause. And there are other parts in our statute and our rules that say, hey, if you've got reason to believe that a pharmacist has engaged in inappropriate conduct, unethical conduct, violating a law, is not competent to practice, there are other provisions in our statutes and rules that say you as a pharmacist, you as a licensee or permittee have an obligation to report that. This is simply terminated, in my mind, in the plain definition of the word. Their service as PIC is done.
The only challenge there, Mark, is yes, there's an obligation for pharmacist permit holder to report those folks, but there's no time period on when they have to report. I think you and I are going to have myself, you and Kelly are going to have a discussion probably in September sometime. We wanted to put some timeframes in last legislative session regarding that, but for some reason we couldn't come to an agreement. So that may be a little bit problematic, especially if it's. I'm sorry?
Wouldn't there be an interim fix?
Not necessarily. So, I mean, there are areas where you might struggle to find somebody to be a PIC. Plus, if you need to post a job, say you terminated somebody for cause, right? For whatever reason that is, you obviously can't replace them and don't have a plan to replace them until you know that you're terminating them. Employers find a way to work with it. You may not be putting the best person in charge, just speaking from my own personal experience in the past supervising lots of stores.
That's the perspective I come from as well. The pharmacist in charge is almost an unreasonable thing to have in our law in the first place, but we're not going to debate that. But the pharmacist in charge has a profound responsibility, and I have managed large pharmacy chains for a long time, and the sort of immediate nature that's imposed by Kentucky, for example, of, well, if you don't have a pharmacist in charge for 10 minutes, we're going to suspend your license until you find someone. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that has any relevance to public policy. You're going to suspend operations for patients that you have in your care until you can find a new pharmacist in charge. And I don't want Arizona to follow that suit. And so if you wanted to make this section, a pharmacist's responsibility as PIC is terminated for cause related to a violation of, the Pharmacy Practice Act or federal drug laws, well, okay, I can see the immediate need for that. But that's not what this section ever said. My point is I'd like to give the pharmacy permittee a little bit of cushion and a little bit of time to replace their PIC and get someone in there. And I don't think it's fair to ask a temporary staffing agency who's sending someone in an emergency, and frankly, someone who that permit holder's never met before, and somehow designate them as pharmacist in charge just because we have to have one.
Yeah, I totally agree. We did have this discussion during the definition section, but we didn't end up, I don't believe, with like a resolution, because the definition section was kind of a strange place to do it. It was the definition of immediate notice, and it was only used in the pick change rules. I do agree with the notion that any licensee who engages in professional conduct and their employer knows needs to notify the board. And I do think that should probably be within a certain period of time of, like, you need to have time for investigation to happen, but within a certain time period, I think is reasonable. And then I do think that PIC changes need to be handled separately. And I think that there are quite a few states at the 30-day range, like Florida, Nebraska, North Carolina, Wyoming, all allow for a 30-day notification after a PIC change. I would be in favor of separating the term, like a for-cause termination, from a traditional pick change, because I think they should have different reporting requirements.
Yeah, and this particular regulation is simply when there's a change of responsibility. That's all it says.
But it's really for that individual pharmacist to report, not a business, right? So if I became a PIC, it's my responsibility to notify the board today or tomorrow.
True.
It's not the permit holders. This section is not about the permit holder. Now, it also says the pharmacist knows of a pending termination of a pharmacist's responsibility as a PIC. Again, the burden is on that pharmacist. I'm no longer PIC, and I should update my profile or notify the board that I'm no longer PIC.
Is there a responsibility on the permit holder outside of, like, reporting on professional conduct?
Yes, there is, to have a PIC.
Yes.
Oh, so it's having the PIC. It's a lapse in that which causes the issue for the permit.
So once the pharmacist is appointed PIC, do they really need 14 days, Mark, to notify us that they're the PIC?
Well, so here's the deal. I mean, no, they don't, but what's the harm in saying, this happened a few days ago. I didn't have the chance on the day of the event or 24 hours within the day of the event, and that's how it reads, it's 24 hours to notify you. Clearly there's a record of it. because the pharmacist doesn't work there anymore, or has resigned as PIC. What I don't like are the ability to discipline a pharmacist, and the whole issue of any minor administrative violation of the rule results in permanent discipline of $250. And I want to be respectful of the board's need to know things, and not being ridiculous on putting in timelines that could be more reasonable. That's the balance I was going for.
And my thought isn't so much around the notification requirement, it's around the placement of making sure that you have the right person that is capable of the job, right? And so that you have the opportunity to post it for other individuals that are seeking employment and all those kinds of things too.
Lori, this part's not addressing that from a
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess I was thinking of it a little bit differently, was my point.
I think the only leeway, Mark, I think 5 days would be appropriate. I mean, 5 days is plenty of time to notify the board. There is a requirement to do a controlled substance inventory when you're a new PIC as well. And that time frame could get, especially if someone was termed for diversion and you got a new PIC coming in, it's kind of urgent that they do a baseline controlled substance inventory to see what was missing in the prior regime.
A couple of thoughts or questions here. I think we pointed out that this is the notification. I guess I'm having trouble understanding why it's hard to notify that you're not the PIC within 24 hours. That seems to me an easy enough notification. You step down from it. And that's to me just a notification. We're now talking about the next issue of notifying that you are the new PIC and how fast you have to do that. But whether I'm resigning, whether I'm retiring, or whether I'm fired, notifying within 24 hours that I'm not the PIC, given that magnitude of that responsibility, just doesn't seem that hard to me. And frankly, if I were the PIC leaving, I would want to make sure I have notified the board as quickly as I possibly can that I'm not the PIC and I have relieved myself of those responsibilities. So the notification that I'm not the PIC doesn't seem to me the issue. The other issue that we seem to be talking about here is allowing a pharmacy to operate for some period of time without a PIC.
And that section, Roger, will probably come up in a later one under the permit holder's responsibility. So
I mean, I just figured it was worth starting the conversation with it, Ken, because I think they're related to this. Because but I'm happy to wait. That's fine.
No, I agree with you. It is irrelevant. We always have that challenge since we're talking about it. We've always found for the permit holder the immediate requirement, and I've been there. I know it takes time to hire somebody. So we've always asked them for an action plan, and we would take a look at it. If it was a reasonable action plan, we would work with them. And then not really hold them to the immediate notification issue. But again, that's just food for thought, and we can get into that discussion when we attack the permit portion of it. But again, Mark, from a pharmacist perspective, to Roger's point, I'd get my name off the books right away if it was me. But then the first part, 14 days is a little too long. I mean, wiggle room of 5 days maybe.
Well, if you strike my 14 days, and you leave it as R423-110, which is 24 hours, then just get rid of number 2, because that's ridiculous. I mean, the pharmacist knows of a pending termination. They have to do it within 24 hours of notice of a pending termination. It just matters that you do it within 24 hours of not being it anymore.
So Mark, the only thought I had with 2 is if I know I am going to no longer be the PIC on the 30th of this month, I want to let the board know now. I don't have to think about it and I'm done. I'm done with my obligation. I can notify him in advance.
Yeah, but the only thing I'm going for is these $250 fines for not hitting a deadline and not filling out the paperwork right. And I don't want anybody to get wrapped up into dealing with some sort of issue related to a deadline that I don't know. Why do you need to notify the board I get that it's nice to notify them ahead of time, but why do you have 24 hours after the knowledge of your pending termination? I'm like, why
Oh,
can't
I
you
don't
just do
think,
it?
and if you want to clean that up, that's fine. I like the idea. If I'm retiring, I'm leaving, I want to notify them 2 weeks in advance, just so I'm done with that, and I won't forget it and screw it up.
No, I'm fully supportive of that. I think, yeah, as a matter of practice, I'm notifying someone as soon as possible, as soon as I know, and I think that's the intent here. But it seems very prescriptive, and I want to make sure that it's not too prescriptive. If the committee says, hey, this isn't broken, no one's ever gotten one of these $250 fines for this, to my knowledge, we can leave it the way it is.
Well, have we fined the PIC or just the permit holder?
I don't know. I'm just trying to prevent it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if we, in the past, I don't remember going directly to the PIC.
I think we've had some, Kristen, where a person has become the PIC and they haven't notified the board and they haven't done the controlled substance audits.
Okay. That
And
makes sense.
frankly, they should be doing those things.
Mhm.
Right. I've got no problem. If the pharmacist didn't do a controlled substance audit within 10 days of the change, well, that's a big deal, and they should have done that. I got no problem with those types of disciplines. It may be this one isn't broken and we don't have to change it. I'd be perfectly okay with that.
No, and I look forward to the discussion about, are you allowed to have a temporary situation where there's not a PIC?
I agree. I think
Agreed.
to me, that's the bigger concern to me.
So Madam Chair, it would be my proposal that we make no changes here, and the other issues are related to different sections of the rule. We'll talk about those later.
Any opposition to that? Okay, hearing none, let's go back to 404.
All right, so 404. This is the rule that describes unethical practices. Section A is about the prohibition on rebates. It's essentially the Arizona version of the anti-kickback statute. I didn't see any issues that I thought required any sort of changes there. But I did want to talk about Section B, which has come up often and frequently for Arizona pharmacies, and that is the issue of prescription order blank advertising. And there is a statute that talks about a prohibition on prescription order blank advertising. It's in 32-1901.01, but it has always been my contention that there is a difference between prescription order blanks, pads of paper that say Mark Bozen's pharmacy is the best pharmacy ever, which would also violate another ethical rule of claiming clinical superiority. Then these specialty pharmacies that have on their websites PDFs that can be downloaded and filled out by a prescriber that ask for very, very specific information, usually for very, very specific medications, where lots of information is necessary to fill the prescription safely than would normally be required under our code. For example, the weight of the patient, the creatinine clearance calculation for the patient, the whether or not they're Philadelphia chromosome positive, things like that that specialty pharmacies use throughout the country, and refer prescribers to that form on their website. Prescribers fill it out and fax it or email it back to the pharmacy. It has always been the enforcement position of this board that those pharmacies located in Arizona that fill those prescriptions are in violation of this rule, putting them at a competitive disadvantage to their brethren in other states, and that hasn't seemed fair. So Section B, I think, could be more specific to what the intent of the statute was, and it is providing prescription order blanks to a prescriber and not necessarily allowing prescribers to seek a prescription order form that may be available for download and then sending that to the pharmacy. I think there's something uniquely different about not handing out prescription blanks, but making a form available on your website that arguably would lead to safer care for the patient.
How do we know how the patient got the prescription, a blank, or the pharmacy got the blank? You know, like if it was the provider that sought it out, or if it was more or less pushed on them. You know what I'm saying? Or does that matter?
Well, I have never met a prescriber who's felt that a pharmacy pushed on them to fill out a form. Usually the prescribers, particularly with specialty medications, and I think this is the example that comes in most often is, pharmacy, I'm tired of you calling me and asking me for more information. I always forget what I'm supposed to put on the form. Can you help me do that? And the way I've accommodated that with my clients in the pharmacies is we're providing the form, but then the doctor's like, you didn't put your fax number on it or your name. How do I know which pharmacy to send this to? Which one has this drug in stock? And I'm like, well, I'm not allowed to do that. You're supposed to write in the fax number yourself. And it's just silliness. And it's inconsistent with the standard of care in almost every other state.
Is it almost steering? Is that the concern?
No, I don't think it's steering. Steering is a different issue. I would seek to rewrite this in a way that says, hey, prescription order blank advertising and furnishing a medical practitioner with a specific order blank, maybe the word is actively, borrowing the sentence, the part of number 2, actively giving that to the prescriber is still offensive to us because the statute says it is. But the whole, it's available on our website if you want to use it, doc, which arguably could be passively, maybe we just get rid of the word passively. Because passively is not part of the statute.
Is there an alternative solution where you can pose an exception to this prohibition and say for products that require more information, or for products that require, I don't know, a large amount of detail? I understand that those are not specific things, but it could exempt those specific types of orders.
I'm not opposed to working on exemption language. I think it would be hard to make broad enough to accommodate modern specialty pharmacy practice, but I think that would be a good compromise.
Striking this language, Mark, would be not just for specialty, it'd impact everybody, right?
Well, and that's it. I mean, there is no license that talks about specialty pharmacy. I gave a talk the other day about what makes a specialty pharmacy different than another one, and today it's pharmacies that provide large amounts of data to third parties are considered specialty pharmacies. Everyone's qualified to dispense a specialty drug by virtue of their license and their license to practice pharmacy. And there are lots of specialty drugs that are located in the community pharmacies now, but it doesn't mean that the information that the pharmacist needs in order to fill that prescription safely isn't the same, and because it is.
I think the issue, we typically run into an issue with this, with those highly complex compounded products. is where we run into an issue, right?
Agreed. Physicians are terrible at writing for compounded products. And
And-
I would much rather teach a physician to write for it safely than to rely on them to try to do it on their own. I would agree that that's the same issue as with specialty drugs. I obviously have a strong opinion here. I'm going to let other people talk. I've said my piece.
If the issue is advertising, could it say in here that if you were going to provide these order blanks or whatever we want to call them, that there has to be verbiage on there that says that the prescription can be filled at any pharmacy?
That's so in my past, I did that. I put in very, very bold letters at the top that the use of this form is not exclusive to our pharmacy. I put in the freedom of choice language and said, prescriber, you can fax this to anyone you'd like. This just happens to be my fax number. That was not, from an enforcement position, an acceptable means, and we were instructed to take off any identifying information, even if the only identifying information is simply our fax number.
I do think that there is value in reducing unnecessary back and forth between prescribers' offices and pharmacies and reserving those interactions for like clinical conversations as opposed to this prescription is missing something. So like I do think it's an important concept.
The issue is not the form itself, it's that it has the name of the pharmacy and the fax number on it, which is creating, because you could clearly put the forms out on the internet now or pass those out to the docs. It's the pharmacy's name or the pharmacist's name and the fax number. So I'm wondering if there's a compromise here. Maybe we just limit the size of the pharmacy name or thing, and you have the caution, you know, it may be taken anywhere, but you limit it. But I do understand the doc has a piece of paper, he doesn't know where to send it. Or he takes it down.
Yeah, what if you just clarify that it can't have identifying information of the pharmacy on there? I mean, I understand why pharmacies would want their information on there, but if this is really a patient safety concern, why does it have to, if it was available from the pharmacy and it didn't have any identifying information, why would that be?
They're saying they don't know where they can take it to get it filled.
Mm-hmm.
Can this be on a separate document? That's not a prescription? Some of
It's
this
what we do.
information?
Emily, we used to have a 2-page document that had the pharmacy's name, fax number information, and the second page would be the prescription, and the doctors kept screwing them up.
Cover letter or something, yeah.
I mean, I agree, just leave the pharmacy off and then it's up to the prescriber to handle that. Because if it's a patient issue, safety issue, it's handled by the blank.
So just to throw one more piece on this, and this sort of fits it, you're seeing some pharmacies now having their own portals that are out there that prescribers can go into to create a prescription. Is that prescription advertising? They're not giving them anything. They're going in to create an electronic prescription, but there's already a portal that's out there. And I think that's where we're going to end up on a number of these anyway, to be able to do this. That's where ultimately it's going to go, because we're going to have more and more electronic scripts.
So the portal belongs to the pharmacy,
It might.
but
Yeah.
they're choosing that pharmacy. No one told them to go to that pharmacy to get that prescription.
No, not the patient, the prescriber.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one told the prescriber to go to that either. They weren't directed there. They chose to go there. Right?
But
They
is
might
that
have
the
been
case
marketed.
always? We've had some cases. There's several that I can think of. I think that are still ongoing where there was some alleged, whether or not like the outreach to the prescriber and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But that's sort of where I was going. Could there be a compromise? Actively is bad. I can't be printing out pads and dropping them off at the doctor's office and saying, hey, use my pharmacy exclusively, sending my sales team out there. But if the doctor chose my pharmacy and recommended it to the patient says, yeah, it sounds great, and the doctor simply used a form that was available for download on the website, what's the difference between that and a portal?
How do we know that how they got that information?
It's on my website. You can double check it.
I mean,
And we've had some licenses appear before us recently, Kristen, where we said you have to take those down or say that they're not eligible in Arizona.
And so now you've got, for patient safety reasons, these forms are very valuable, and patients are going to specialty pharmacies outside the state of Arizona because the state of Arizona is one of the few that's so prescriptive on what's considered advertising.
yeah, I don't have a problem with the blanks being filled out to aid in getting the right medication and the right dose.
I think the heartburn is you're not giving a patient a choice. Doctor's making a choice and the pharmacy's making a choice. And the patient has no choice at this point.
Well, we could go into a different debate there. I'd argue that the health plan's making the choice.
Well, that's a different debate. You're right.
So Mark, you said this is also in statute.
It is. There's a statute. It's 1901, subsection B and the 20s. Let me see here.
The reason
Also, sorry, I was going to say while you're looking, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. This is allowed in other states. They allow them to put the pharmacy name on there.
Yes.
Okay.
Here, the statute is 1901.01, subsection B, 25. Providing or causing to be provided to a medical practitioner prescription order blanks or forms bearing the pharmacist's or pharmacy's name, address, or other means of identification. And I think what's interesting about the language of the statute is the verbs are providing or causing to be provided. Posting it on my website, I would argue, could be construed as causing it to be provided, but it's just on my website. Doctor has to go to it. Patient has to go to it. People have to go to it. It's there for your use. And it reminds you of my fax number, which is also on my website, and that's not prohibited.
Okay, I have a question, I guess. So is a majority of the group opposed to this, or are there individuals that feel this is okay? If there's already states allowing it, I'm just wondering what we're trying to solve.
Kelly, my only concern is around steerage with this. And
Like a patient not knowing they can go to a different pharmacy.
right.
And I get that. I think it needs to be clear.
There's no way to know that Mark didn't stand there and hand them out, that they were sought out by the provider.
From a pharmacy's perspective. Well, but I think I guess in taking different, courses, learning about independent pharmacy, for example, you go out and you market your services to physicians' offices, talk about why your pharmacy is unique compared to others. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing to market your pharmacy to patients or physicians. Everyone should still have the choice, of where they want to get that filled, I guess I personally don't see an issue with it as long as it's clear on any form or communication that the patient and provider is not restricted to using, that this is, you know, a valid prescription that can be taken to any pharmacy. That's just my personal opinion.
I'm aligned with that.
From a health system perspective, that makes it really challenging to counter detail, or if it's something that for the cost of our health plan, we need to keep those within a health system working with the patient if that's their choice to keep them in. Just because the way our health plans are set up, it makes it very difficult for health systems. Just to add that to the confusion.
So is the suggestion to maybe clarify the language that if a pre-printed prescription blank is used, that there must be language that identifies that the prescription would be valid at any pharmacy of pharmacy of the patient or prescriber's choosing?
Is that, can we do that in rule?
Well, what I'm proposing, perhaps, rather than striking the whole thing, is just getting rid of the "or passively" in subsection 2. Because passively doesn't allow the reasonable situation where prescriber just needs some help here. I've selected your pharmacy, and in most cases in specialty, the health plan has selected the pharmacy. I need to get you a prescription for this patient. Every other specialty pharmacy outside of Arizona provides these forms. Don't you have a form with your fax number on it so that I know once I'm done completing it, I can hand it to an MA who can put it on the fax machine? And as long as that form is downloaded by the free will of the prescriber, and it is available, that exact same form is available for inspector to say, yeah, that is openly on your website, then you know, I think what's offensive to the folks there is it's the active detailing of, here's a bunch of forms, doctor, just send them all to me and let the chips fall where they may. The doctor has to go to the website, has to select the pharmacy, presumably with the conversation with the patient, and that's when the doctor finds the form.
I think my confusion, like, and this is probably because I'm not an attorney. I totally hear what you're saying. But doesn't the statute preclude you from putting the pharmacy info on the order? So how does striking number 2 fix it in the rule?
Statute reads, go back to it, providing or causing to be provided. It's not the pharmacy's name on it that's offensive. It's the provision of a blank that has the pharmacy's name on it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So for example, if your telephone prescription pad has your pharmacy's name at the top, and the doctor walks in and goes, oh man, I left my prescription pad at home. I got one more thing I got to do. Can I use one of your prescriptions before I leave the office? Technically, that wouldn't be okay either. I'd have to go, nope, you have to dictate it to me, doc, which is what I do now in Arizona. But they don't have to do that for specialty pharmacies located in other states.
Wait, but even though it's the act of providing, didn't you say that putting it on the website was the or causing to be provided?
I think you could interpret, in fairness, I think you could interpret the phrase causing to be provided to be similar to that. And so I provide that as full disclosure.
Oh, okay.
I think reasonable people can interpret that to prohibit that too.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I read it, but I was just like, I was confused because I thought you had explained it that way. And I wasn't sure how it affected the rules.
I did, but the other thing that is a matter of law is the regulatory body that interprets the statute generally gets deference to how they interpret it.
I have an idea, and I say this a little facetiously. Let's just go to mandatory electronic scripts. We avoid this whole issue.
I like that.
I like it. I like it, Roger.
Because
I don't think we can mandate it here, though, can we?
Change the rule.
I would be glad to.
All right. So, Madam Chair, I'm not hearing any consensus one way or the other. I'm happy to move on.
Okay.
The last thing that I proposed to change was subsection. I know it's on Zoom, but my eyes are too bad. So I'm pulling it up in my original here.
I can expand it, Mark.
Okay. Subsection D, fraudulent claim for a fee. So there is a substantive policy statement that is on our board's website that talks about the ability for a pharmacist to provide multiple refills when the prescription's presented for initial or a refill. So the situation is prescriber writes 30 count, it's once a day dosing, 30 count with 11 refills. There's a substantive policy statement that says pharmacist, as long as you follow the law and the rules, you can dispense more than a 30-day supply using the remaining refills at your discretion. And so since that's a substantive policy statement, I thought this would be a good place to describe a fraudulent claim for a fee. And the reason why I think it falls very nicely in fraudulent claim for a fee is when a PBM comes in and audits you and says, hey, this is a violation of our contract, great. It very well might be, and we have no control over contract. But when they go so far as to say, and it's fraud, no, it's not fraud, because this is something that's permissive under the Arizona rules, and here's the rule. So I'm proposing taking our substantive policy statement and sticking it here.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Agreed. I think it's good for patients.
Mm-hmm.
Any objections?
We're also adding that refill consolidation one to rule, I believe. We moved that, we decided to move it out of policy to rule. So I think that even further supports it.
Agreed.
Do we need to limit 3 uncontrolled substances?
Well, it's not. It's a good point, Roger. It's not in the substantive policy statement. I cut and pasted the language from the substantive policy statement, but I always interpreted the restrictions on this thing to be the phrase that says complies with all board statutes and rules, but it doesn't say federal rules. Although the board says you got to follow federal law too. It's a good point, Roger. One that we could just throw in here.
Yeah, you could just wordsmith it a little bit. A fraudulent claim does not include providing multiple refills of a non-controlled prescription.
Yeah.
You should probably put the word medication after prescription. And then
I want to include devices.
that's good. Medication and devices. Yeah. All right, and then Cam, just for your record keeping later, going back up to the section B, take away my change. Oh, you already took it away. Perfect. All right. All right, that's it. I'm done, unless other people see other things that they'd like to address.
Thank you, Mark. Any other suggestions? Next up, I think we're Rogers 2 sections. How's everybody doing on time? It's almost 4:30. Is everybody good to keep going?
Yeah.
Cam, I did not send you something in advance. I wonder if we can put up the language of 407 though?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. And once he has it up here, as we're going through this, it may be that, Matt, to go back to the point we talked about before when Emily was talking, maybe we reverse the position. Since 407 does really have all of the requirements, maybe we don't need it in that earlier one where it says the pharmacist needs to verify all of the following, as I'm looking at it again and again, but I'm okay either way on that.
I can add to, I've thought more about it since then. And like, I mean, there's a lot of requirements in 407 that maybe aren't clinically significant. Like, for instance, like transferring pharmacist name, like the pharmacist may not need to verify that. And I actually don't know how they would. So I think everyone's opinion was fair before to keep it to the minimal, like, components of the prescription.
Okay. So let's start with the first section here, which is A1, which is what are the requirements for a prescription order itself, to be able to work through this one. And I think all of the things that are listed here are necessary. I would add, as I thought about it more throughout the last 2 hours, I would add the prescription serial number, because in L, we already have the name or initials of the dispensing pharmacist, and those don't come from the doc. So if we're adding things to the order, we may as well add the serial number. So I'd probably just make it M, Cam, on that, but. I did not have anything else in A. I thought the list was fine and everything else that was there. B is the requirements for the refill, and I didn't have any changes there.
Can we go back up to, can we go back up to A for a second?
Sure.
So under A2, the record retention for drugs and devices for 7 years. I can't think of any other state that's anywhere close to 7 years in terms of hard copies. How does anybody else feel about that?
You're saying it should be less?
Yes.
What does CMS require?
CMS is 10.
That's what I was thinking. I was almost thinking we should match that.
Well, for facilities that don't use offsite storage, that's a lot of records.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a lot of records coming from big pharmacies. We spent an enormous amount of rent on just warehouses to store ancient prescriptions and invoices. Well, not invoices,
Yeah.
but the prescriptions.
I can see it both ways. Either go with the federal, or, you know, we have electronic versions of it. So I don't know that it's kind of antiquated now to save them. I can see both ways there.
I think it's going to be relevant for storage, like physical storage, for probably like another 7 years, right? Like that's when all of the non-controlled non-controlled hard copies for 30 days. So this is talking about the record. This is a little confusing, actually.
We let everybody electronically keep these now anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think moving away from physical space requirements, now moving to like server requirements.
Right.
And maybe we just need to further clarify the electronic piece, that things can be stored off-site or don't have, they can be stored only electronically after 30 days.
Oh, that'd be good.
Which I think that rule does exist now in another section. It's like the computer records or something, right? That
Correct.
section is a little bit confusing. I was actually hoping we could just make it a little bit more clear, but it's separate from this issue.
I agree. I think it's a little bit confusing. Okay, I'm not hearing that we need to change it. It's just something that stuck out to me, looking at what other states require, that it was far different.
So just to clarify, you either keep an electronic copy or a hard copy. If you're going to keep a hard copy, it's for 7 years. Is that the?
I think this says all, so even the electronic ones
Yeah.
would be 7 years.
Correct.
It is interesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
isn't DEA like 3
Yes.
Correct.
or 2? Like that
DEA
is
is 3.
interesting. Is the important piece to keep the order, the dispensing records, or both? For this length of time. I understand that they're important, like especially sooner in the process.
Do we need to spell it out that it can be electronic or hard copy?
It's
Here.
open-ended, so it doesn't have to be spelled out. I'm sure Roger and Mark would be more than happy to argue.
I'm sorry, what am I arguing? We already have a rule that says I can keep it electronically.
So I'm sorry, there's no argument.
No, I agree. There's no argument.
And this is broad enough that it allows you to keep it even under microfiche. The old timers know that, but sorry, Emily, but had to kind of work that one in again.
So any other thoughts on A? I guess I did have a question, Cam. Cam, is there any more policies or information on the red cap exceptions, or is that sort of burned itself off now, which is in A3 or A4, I guess?
We haven't had any issues, and nobody's brought anything further to our attention on it.
Right, then I don't think there's anything to fix then. Okay, B's the refills. Didn't see a whole lot of issue in B, but happy to go on, or if you guys want another minute or two.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, C is the prescription order adaption, which is relatively new. They got put in here just last year or two, which I think is great. Okay. D is the antiquated copy. I thought about taking it out, but I don't know that it's harming anybody.
People still ask for this from time to time.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll leave that in. So E is where we get to the lot more fun, is the transfers on this one, and the whole set of rules that go on for it. And we got transfer rules for for non-controlled, then we got for controlled, and then we got transfers outside the state of Arizona and inside the state of Arizona. And I'm not sure why we need all of these different subcategories of transfers, because almost all of them are identical.
Well,
So-
I have a couple of things to add to the mix. Transfer within a system, a closed system.
Yep.
As far as I'm aware, you can do that for as amount of refills. But it's not clear here, and I've heard of inspectors questioning that. And also transfer of a controlled substance electronically. I've also heard of inspectors mentioning that as not being allowed.
Oh, there's a clear section of Arizona law that allows for the electronic transfer.
That's new.
Yeah, it's
The
there
rule
though.
is new. Yeah, so that might be why it may be old. That
Yeah, that was
old thing.
prior. It stopped at fax and it didn't have the word electronic in there.
I had people ask me about this about a month ago, and an inspector had brought it up in one of our pharmacies. That's why I brought it up.
The internal transfer of them.
Electronic transfer of a controlled substance.
And you can, the issue comes up is if you can electronically transfer the initial fill of a controlled.
But you can't have a C3 through 5, right?
You can transfer a C3 through 5. The question is, technically, you're not supposed to be able to transfer it until it's been filled once.
Unless you're doing an electronic transfer.
No, unless the prescription was electronically submitted.
And then you can forward it, which isn't technically a
Right.
transfer, and you have to be able to forward it with a digital signature, which doesn't exist today.
And the DA allows
Oh, but it
for
does.
that.
There's one software vendor out there that did it, but they got to get EPS certified. So, and once they do, it'll be amazing.
So my general thought is there a way to combine all of these different sub ones. And then I have a couple of other specifics that I wanted to identify. We've got all these talks about transfers, and I know we have a rule pending on technicians, but there's a whole bunch of things in here that say who can do transfers, and I think you need to add technicians to it if the technician piece goes through.
Well, and Mark mentioned this previously about making it clear that it can be, a prescription can be transferred after it's been input into a, not physically filled. It can be transferred
Yep.
if it's been input into the computer.
So that would be another change. And then I have one other one. There's a couple of states that mandate this, New York and Nebraska, several other states that allow it, South Dakota and Idaho, but they allow the transfer of a single fill of a prescription. You're not required to transfer the entirety of the prescription.
Oh, I like that.
And I would like it that it would be at the patient's choice if it's a single fill or the entirety of the script. Because sometimes there's a patient who is in another part of the city or out of town and they just want a single fill transferred. And what happens now is technically you have to transfer the whole script and then you theoretically have to transfer it all back, and it's just a mess.
Yep.
And
I
you're
agree
talking
with
about
that.
non-controls, right, Roger?
Right, non-controlled. Can't do it for controls, agreed.
Right.
I think that would be really good for patients, like if they're on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
I think
it's
okay.
It's really good when you're out of stock too, and the patient's like, I don't want to go to that other pharmacy. Do it just this 1 month. I'll have it in stock next month. I'll make sure I order it for you.
Right.
Yeah. I think in terms of the like transfer for controls, transfer for non-controls in and out of state, my preference would be that the requirements are the same for all of them and then just add DEA for controls. That's my general thought.
I agree with you. I would have separate for control because there are some additional restrictions and limitations, but everything else would be the same. Transfers in, out, and around.
The only other thing I would add, Roger, and I don't know if you addressed it, but the substantive policy guide that makes it very, very clear that for a non-controlled drug, you can absolutely transfer a prescription that hasn't been filled yet. We made a substantive policy statement about it a long time ago because it wasn't in our rule. Now's our opportunity to put it in the rule.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I agree. And then the last one I have is in 6A. It says the electronic transfer of original things by the same company, or it's the heading of 6. And I understand why it should be the same company or pursuant to pharmacies, pursuant to a written contract, a written agreement of some sort. We do that with lots of other parts in the statute. I'm not sure why this one references same company.
Shared database is maybe the,
Yeah, but you can have shared database between contracted pharmacies.
oh, right.
Right, or what about in the case of an acquisition or something like that, where you have like an electronic database that you purchase?
Yep.
But to me, by same company or pursuant to contract or contractual entities, but something.
Good
Same
point.
company always was an amorphous term to me because we've got lots of big companies that have lots of subsidiary companies. And
Right.
That's a good point.
Do we want that to say that even if it's pursuant to contract, that they have to be using that common or shared database, or is it like a either or and or? Because if in Lori's example, if I purchase like a independent pharmacy and we have their records maybe on a different server in the pharmacy, it's not technically a shared or common, but I'm, as a patient comes in wanting a refill, I'm moving it from that computer system to.
so maybe we should discuss what a shared or common database is, because it's been my perspective, it's a fairly amorphous term, and I've used it that way because I think if you purchase another pharmacy, it's a shared database because both of you can use that same database and you can duplicate it. But if we need to make that clearer, the other one that happens is many times at the start of a new year, there's a mass transfer of prescriptions from one PBM moves the contract or the business, and you'll see the PBMs and the pharmacies involved send hundreds of thousands of prescriptions to the other, and they do it using common electronic data. They move it from one to the other. In the old days, it was a floppy disk, but other things, and I always have used that as a common database. They both had it, but it wasn't a real-time one.
The file.
That would be safer than somebody individually doing the transfers.
And that was always the logic of it, is by far is that safer than trying to do oral scripts for 100,000 prescriptions and moving across. So I don't know if we needed more discussion or wordsmithing on it, but I said the common or shared database was a amorphous enough term. It gave it a lot of flexibility. So, Cam, we got all the things identified. We just need to put the words in.
Yes, so I will work on merging E into a more structured, uniform format, so we don't have repetitive language.
And then the concept of initial and the text and the single fill.
Yeah, let me make a note here.
CAM and tech transfer. So I would assume we're not going to be done with this by the time that rule is done, probably either.
And then
should
single
the tech
fill.
again, should the tech transfer go in here, because then it becomes.
Oh, you're right. Because it's delegated.
It's delegated. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we don't need it. I agree with you.
The only question that raises for me is when you are recording a transfer, it may need to be reworded to who receives the transfer as opposed to the pharmacist who receives it. That just may need a tweak, like the authorized individual who receives it, or or gives the transfer, because it may not be a pharmacist anymore for record keeping.
Gives or receives for that matter.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at E4, and it's got, the transfer can go between two licensed pharmacists, a licensed pharmacist and a licensed intern, or two licensed interns. And it felt like text would fit within there as compared to delegated, but. And then Cam, the other concept I want to make sure I got is the single fill transfer, not the whole prescription transfer. And I don't have anything else in 407.
Was there another point around the electronic transfer of controls? Understanding that in the one of those recent rule changes did allow it, but it says non-controls here, I think, in the electronics transfer section. So I forget what rule was changed like in 2019. But this number 6, it says for an electronic transfer of an it's the original order, I guess is what the issue is. So what's the solution there? Or is it just forwarding it?
That's what the DEA allows.
So it doesn't have to be addressed here.
But we can put it in. I don't have any problem with putting it in here. That consistent with the DEA rules, you can transfer an initial controlled substance prescription following the same Arizona rules. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss it, or that everything that we discussed was addressed.
So it can be forwarded, but there's not a electronic solution for that at this time. Because that was.
According to Mark, it's almost there.
Okay,
Yeah,
I just
it's
looked up the question that was sent to me, and that was the question.
Yeah, there's a software vendor that's figured it out, but they have to get EPCS certified.
And that's if it's a controlled substance and it's never been filled, and now they want it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, they've got a piece of technology now that would make it happen. I'm skeptical as to whether or not it works because I haven't seen it, but they said it'll work, and I'm like, well, you got to get it certified first anyway, so we'll see.
Okay.
And the only other thing, Kristen, I know you talked about transferring controlled substances within a shared or common platform for a number of fills. I believe DEA's position, Roger, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, is they have to maintain the same prescription number.
Okay.
Is that correct? Because I believe my conversation with DEA, that's what was conveyed to me. If I transferred within the same company, but the prescription number changes, then that rule doesn't apply anymore.
This is Mark. I hadn't heard that, and I don't know how you could make that happen. I don't know how.
Walgreens has that. They may change the store number as a prefix, or
the store number is the prefix. Yeah.
No, we don't do that. We don't.
It automatically assigns a new number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't transfer electronically either. We transfer them by phone between stores for controls.
But what about non-controls?
Non-controls, it changes the prescription number.
Yeah.
It assigns it a new prescription number when it's transferred. You can see the history of the whole prescription, but it does change the number. I've not heard that though, Kim, that it has to retain the same prescription number.
I hadn't either.
I thought it was like shared real-time type thing.
Still gonna shared real-time system like the chains have still changes the prescription number, store to store. Because I wouldn't know how to, I mean, the computer system makes it easier now, but back in the day when we had back tags, where would I store that prescription that's now completely different sequence? I don't know. It's interesting.
There are stores actually that are storing it using the date versus prescription number.
Good idea.
And we may want to look at that also, because I think we've had a deviation that stores prescriptions by date and not serial number.
I like that, to Roger's point earlier in the call, that requiring the prescription identification number to be a serial number is difficult for some pharmacy systems now, as complex as they are. And I don't think the serialization is as important as, can you retrieve this for me and not duplicate it with another number, and that ought to be good enough.
Agreed. And does it really need to be filed in numerical order, or as long as it's retrievable, does that matter? Like, why are pharmacies going to waste their time to sort prescription numbers?
So just as a note, the logic I always heard on that from some of the inspectors, and there may be folks on who can do it, is sometimes they would pick a particular prescription number and they wanted to look at the 5 or 10 immediately before it and the 5 or 10 immediately after it, so they could see if there was a problem, if there was contamination, if there was mixture, and it was the only way they could tell which ones were immediately before or after was by serial number.
That's
I don't know if that
interesting.
still holds, but that was the logic I'd heard.
I don't know, my computer system could tell you down to the second when certain keystrokes happened, regardless of what the prescription number is.
Okay.
All right, anything else, Roger, on that, 407?
Nope, that was all I had in 407.
Thought I gave you a hard one, buddy. You got away, easy.
Well, I looked at it. I thought it was going to be really hard. I actually printed it out and wrote all kinds of notes on it, did everything. But as I dug through it, I realized most of it was relevant.
So we still have 3 sections. Kevin is not here to go over his section, unfortunately. We have about 11 minutes left before our meeting ends. We have it scheduled till 5. I think Zoom may just cut us off. Do you wanna chance it, Lori, or what would you like to do? Kelly, is yours pretty extensive?
I don't think so. I sent you, I don't know if you.
I think computer
got my
records
email.
could be pretty. I think computer records could take quite a bit of time with all the other discussion we've had.
I had sent, Cam, and I sent it to you after the meeting started, so I apologize, but I had struck a couple sections in one of the letters. There may be more that you guys want to do with some of the other. So basically, I don't see the need for A or C or HD. And those were what everything else seemed to be. There's some terminology that I know we were talking about updating, but I don't see why A is necessary. We're required to follow all the laws. You know, most of these things are going to be determined by your company at a larger scale. So to me, I don't see why we need to have that in the rule. Letter A.
You're saying the capital A, right?
Yes, sorry. Having a systems manual. So I had struck A. I left B alone, except for I highlighted a few things I know we had discussed. That CRT display, I don't know if we're gonna use some other verbiage for that. I struck all section C And then HD.
Hey, Emily, do you know what a CRT display is?
Hey, we've already been through this, you know, in the definition section, and I do not. So I had proposed the term visual display instead.
I like it.
Kelly,
I think I
your
just got a new
suggestion-
gray hair, Emily. Thank you for that.
Sorry.
Any thoughts on C, guys? I'm sorry.
No,
You were saying to strike C, Kelly?
Yeah, a whole letter A, that whole section, and then whole C, unless there's something I'm missing as to why it's necessary, but
I'm aligned with that.
I think it was necessary back in the days when you didn't have a computer system that could provide this data.
because there's lots of other sections of law that talk about what records we have to maintain for each prescription. So I don't see why, yeah, some of this stuff is included in this section.
Okay, I'm good with that.
I didn't change anything else other than HD. Maybe it was HD.
Do we need to talk any more about the electronic record keeping discussion around like retaining hard copies and some of those kinds of things that we were talking about before in this section, or is that more appropriate under the records discussion later?
I don't know if this talks about that. It just talks about needing to have the information retrievable within 72 hours. A printout of requested prescription order information. I didn't see anything in here about hard copy. That might be in a different section.
The rule and statute change form that staff puts up says that that rule that removes a requirement to maintain hard copies for 30 days is in 408. But I actually think that's why I was saying before, it's a little bit confusing because someone was recently asking me about this.
Yeah, I didn't see it when I went through that.
Let me grab actually what.
Kim, can you scroll down a bit?
It's 408 H lowercase e. So actually, so H is actually the portion that allows for electronic record keeping. And that's what was written in order to get rid of the 30-day thing. But then all it did was exclude in letter E is the controlled substances. So that refers you to follow the regular hard copy rule for the controls. So it was a little bit hard for like my pick to understand because it wasn't super explicit. But I was able to understand.
Oh, because it's referring to the statute, and the statute is the one that says, okay. That's why, yeah, because I didn't notice 30 days anywhere listed, so.
Yeah, the 30 days was taken out. So, yeah. It's like instead of filing the original hard copy is what it says.
Yeah.
We're gonna be
I don't know.
shut down in 3 minutes. Just wanted to give a warning.
I just don't feel like it's super clear. I feel like we need to look at the section a little bit closer.
Maybe start here next time with fresh eyes.
If that's what our
Agreed.
intent is.
Yeah.
I think the only thing Kelly also recommended was removing,
It's D, actually. I think
This
I
right
said
here.
D, yeah. Because I was saying to get rid of subsection A.
Hey, honestly, some of those policies may actually be required in like the permit sections anyway.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it was kind of redundant here. If you're already required to comply with certain things.
Two minutes, guys.
I think we pick up here next time.
Do we have
Is
a
every-
next meeting scheduled?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna ask.
So we have a complaint review coming up. We have a permit review coming up, and we have a board meeting coming up mid-September.
And we have a district meeting next
And we have
week.
a district meeting next weekend. So we're juggling a few things right now, Roger. So I'm gonna have to try to squeeze it in somewhere.
Okay.
So are we thinking the week? Are we thinking in September still?
Yeah, I think we can do it in September. It's just a matter of trying to find a hole somewhere to plug it
Okay.
in.
We'll just send out a poll.
Yep, I'll do a doodle again.
All right.
Sounds good. Did everybody like this format of looking at the an assigned section beforehand and kind of working through these? Does this format work for everybody?
Yep.
I like it. It's a little bit faster, so.
Makes my job easier too. I appreciate you guys.
So Cam, let's, I guess, do that again this next time and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
All right, so
Thank
let's adjourn at 4:59. Thanks everybody for your time and for your participation and for being prepared for the meeting today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.